After years of building our family business from the ground up, I watched my father hand my younger sister the house, the liquid cash reserves, and the entire company, all while looking me in the eye and calling me an ungrateful burden. 3 months later, she appeared at my apartment door, soaked from the rain and trembling. She begged me to save them. But she still had not told me what she had done. To understand how a family empire collapsed so spectacularly and how I ended up holding the match that burned it down, I need to take you back to a rainy Tuesday afternoon in Ohio. I need to take you into my father's corner office. $150,000 does not just evaporate into thin air, Dad. I slammed the heavy quarterly financial ledger onto the center of his solid mahogany desk. The sharp thud echoed in the massive office, cutting through the low hum of the air conditioning. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the sprawling yard of Thomas Logistics was slick with cold autumn rain. Dozens of 18-wheelers sat parked in perfect rows, a massive freight fleet I had literally bled to keep running. I am Sarah. I am 31 years old, and for the last 10 agonizing years, I have been the senior financial controller for our family business. That is a very formal, very impressive-sounding title my father gave me in lieu of an actual market salary. My father, Thomas, did not even flinch at the sound of the ledger hitting his desk. He simply took a slow sip of his black coffee, adjusted his expensive silk tie, and looked at me with the kind of patronizing exhaustion usually reserved for a toddler throwing a tantrum. He sighed heavily, leaning back in his leather executive chair. "You are being dramatic again, Sarah. It is a simple accounting variance, a cash flow overlap. You are making a mountain out of a molehill. A variance." I repeated the word, feeling a hot spike of adrenaline shoot straight through my chest. A variance is when office supply costs run $500 over budget because someone ordered the expensive printer ink. This is $150,000 missing from our operational reserve account, and it is completely tied to the phantom equipment lease authorized by Todd. Todd is my younger sister Chloe's husband. He is a flashy, loud-mouthed guy who wears suits that are slightly too tight and a Rolex that I am 90% sure is fake. He drives a leased Porsche Macan that he cannot actually afford, and he uses hollow business jargon like synergy and disruption to cover up the fact that he has absolutely no idea how a commercial logistics company operates. Dad had hired him as our director of business development 6 months ago as a wedding gift to Chloe. Chloe is the golden child of our family. She is 3 years younger than me, effortlessly beautiful, and has never worked a hard day in her entire life. While I was spending my early 20s working 70-hour weeks, navigating terrifying meetings with angry creditors, and literally pulling Thomas Logistics out of Chapter 11 bankruptcy, Chloe was failing out of a luxury public relations degree program at an expensive private university. I remember the year the company almost went under. I was 26. I sold my own car, a reliable little Honda, just to make payroll for our truck drivers. I ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner for 6 straight months. I did not buy a single new piece of clothing. I sacrificed my own credit score to secure emergency bridge loans for the business. Meanwhile, that exact same year, Dad fully funded Chloe's semester abroad in Italy because she claimed she needed to find her true purpose in life. She found Todd instead. I pointed a shaking finger at the open ledger on the desk. "Look at the vendor invoices, Dad. Todd authorized a commercial lease for 4 new heavy-duty forklifts from a holding company that does not even have a functional website or a registered corporate address. The money was wired out of our accounts last Thursday, but the equipment never arrived at our warehouse. We have dock workers using broken pallet jacks on the loading bay right now, and Todd is currently sitting on a beach in Cabo, with Chloe posting photos of their $500 dinners. That money is gone. He stole it. Do not use that word in this office." My father's voice cracked like a whip. He slammed his coffee mug down so hard, the dark liquid sloshed over the rim, staining the pristine wood of his desk. "You do not accuse your family of theft. Todd is an aggressive forward thinker. He takes risks to grow the brand. Sometimes investments take time to materialize. An investment requires a tangible asset, Dad." I pushed back, refusing to break eye contact. "This is fraud, pure and simple." My father stood up. He was a tall man, imposing and broad-shouldered, and he knew exactly how to use his physical size to dominate every room he walked into. He walked around the heavy desk and stood entirely too close to me, looking down at my practical gray suit and my tired makeup-free face. The faint smell of his expensive cologne mixed with the bitter scent of spilled coffee. "You know what your problem is, Sarah. You are too rigid. You are a bean counter. You look at numbers on a page and you think that is the whole world. You completely lack vision. And frankly, you are jealous." I stared at him, the air rushing out of my lungs. "Jealous? You have always been jealous of your sister," he continued, his voice dropping into a soft, cruel register that was designed to cause maximum emotional damage. "You resent her happiness. You resent that she found a good man and is building a beautiful life while you are still sitting alone in a cubicle every Friday night. You attack Todd because you cannot stand to see Chloe thriving." The profound injustice of his words felt like a physical blow to my stomach. I was not alone in a cubicle on Friday nights by choice. I was there because I was doing the work of 3 different financial departments, so my father could afford his country club membership and his frequent golf trips. I was there because if I took my eyes off the cash flow for a single weekend, the entire logistics empire would crumble under the weight of his incredibly poor financial decisions. I had sacrificed my youth, my dating life, and my mental health to build the very fortune that Chloe was currently drinking away in Mexico. I swallowed the massive lump forming in my throat. I dug my fingernails into the palms of my hands until they ached. I absolutely refused to let him see me cry. "I am not jealous, Dad. I am trying to protect the company that I rebuilt. If the venture capital investors look at these unedited books on Saturday, they will immediately freeze our commercial credit line. The bank will call in our existing loans. We will be completely ruined." Saturday was the Thomas Logistics 30th anniversary gala. It was going to be the biggest, most expensive night in our company's history. 200 of the most influential people in Ohio were invited. Venture capitalists, local politicians, commercial bank executives, and every major shipping client we had ever serviced. My father's expression instantly shifted. The aggressive anger vanished, replaced by a smooth, calculating calm. He reached out and placed a heavy, warm hand on my shoulder. His thumb rubbed the cheap fabric of my blazer. "I know you are trying to protect us, Sarah." He said, his tone dripping with sudden, artificial warmth. "I know how incredibly hard you work for this family. Nobody works harder than you do. Nobody understands the numbers like you do." I hated how much I craved that tiny scrap of validation. Even after the incredibly cruel things he had just said to me, that small moment of praise made my desperate heart flutter. I had spent my entire adult life chasing his approval, and he knew exactly how to weaponize it. "This Saturday is crucial," he continued, giving my shoulder a gentle, fatherly squeeze. "I am turning 65 next month. I am tired, Sarah. I am making a major announcement at the gala regarding the future leadership of Thomas Logistics. It is about my successor. I need everything to be absolutely perfect. The investors need to see a united front and a flawless balance sheet." He looked me deep in the eyes, offering the ultimate unspoken promise. The Chief Executive Officer title, the public recognition for a decade of silent, grueling suffering, the definitive proof that I was finally truly valued by my family. "I need you to be a team player right now," he whispered. "Fix the variance. Smooth out the numbers. Make the financial presentation look perfect for the board members. Can you do that for me? Can you do that for your future?" I looked down at the ledger. I thought about the missing $150,000. Covering it up went against every ethical fiber in my body as a senior accounting professional. It violated everything I believed in, but the promise hanging heavy in the air was simply too intoxicating to walk away from. He was finally going to step down. He was going to hand the reins of the empire directly to me. I would finally have the executive power to fire Todd, fix the accounts, properly cut off Chloe's endless allowance, and run the company the way it desperately deserved to be run. "I will handle it," I said quietly. "Good girl." My father smiled, patting my cheek like I was a loyal, obedient dog. have the final bound reports on my desk by Friday morning. I walked out of his office with my jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. I spent the next 3 days and 3 nights practically living at my desk in the accounting department. I drank so much black coffee, my hands constantly shook. I painstakingly went through thousands of lines of raw financial data. I legally but very creatively moved capital funds from our emergency equipment maintenance reserves to cover the massive hole Todd had blown in the operational budget. I reclassified operating expenses. I depreciated our older fleet assets early to balance the tax liabilities. I built a financial presentation so beautifully structured and bulletproof that it could have easily passed a rigorous federal audit. I cleaned up their toxic mess just like I always did. On Friday afternoon, after placing the pristine leather-bound financial reports on my father's desk, I did something completely out of character. I left the corporate office early and drove to a high-end designer boutique in downtown Columbus. I walked straight past the practical business wear and went into the formal evening wear section. I pulled out an emerald green silk gown. It was elegant, powerful, and completely stunning. It cost $450, which was almost my entire grocery and gas budget for the month. I swiped my debit card without a single second thought. I took the dress back to my cramped apartment, hung it on the outside of my closet door, and stared at it for a long time. I imagined walking into the grand crystal ballroom at the gala. I imagined my father standing at the podium on the brightly lit stage, calling my name into the microphone, telling the entire room of wealthy investors that his brilliant, hardworking daughter was the new chief executive officer of Thomas Logistics. I vividly imagined the look of pure shock on Chloe's face when she realized she would finally have to answer to me. I felt a deep, warm sense of peace wash over my exhausted body. The 10 years of late nights, the canceled vacations, the constant stress, the complete lack of a personal life, it was all finally paying off. I was finally going to get everything I had earned with my own blood and sweat. I had absolutely no idea that the beautiful dress I had just purchased was going to be worn to my own execution. The crystal chandeliers of the downtown Columbus Grand Ballroom cast a warm golden glow over the 200 guests mingling below. It was the Thomas Logistics 30th anniversary gala, and the room was packed with the most powerful venture capitalists, commercial bankers, and local politicians in Ohio. I walked through the double doors wearing my new emerald green silk gown, feeling a strange, intoxicating mix of exhaustion and absolute triumph. For the first time in 10 years, I was not hiding in the back room with a calculator. I was not wearing my practical gray suit. I was walking through the crowd as the soon-to-be-announced chief executive officer of the empire I had literally saved from bankruptcy. Waiters in crisp white shirts carried silver trays of champagne. Investors I had spoken to on the phone hundreds of times stopped to shake my hand. The lead loan officer from our primary commercial bank smiled and raised his glass to me, thanking me for the flawless quarterly financial reports I had delivered just yesterday. I smiled back, my heart pounding with anticipation. I had spent 3 sleepless nights covering up the massive financial hole my brother-in-law Todd had blown in our operational budget. I had protected my family. I had proven my loyalty, and tonight, my father was finally going to reward that loyalty. I found my seat near the front of the stage at the reserved family table. My younger sister Chloe was already there wearing a custom designer dress that cost more than my car. Todd sat beside her, checking his expensive watch and looking bored. They had just returned from their vacation in Mexico, funded entirely by the company cash flow I managed. My father, Thomas, sat at the head of the table. He looked handsome and commanding in his tailored tuxedo. When I sat down, he did not look at me. He did not compliment my dress or thank me for the brutal 70-hour workweek I had just finished. He just kept his eyes fixed on the empty stage. At exactly 8 o'clock, the string quartet stopped playing. The ballroom lights dimmed. A single spotlight hit the podium and my father stood up. The entire room erupted into applause as he walked up the short flight of stairs and took his place behind the microphone. I sat up perfectly straight, my hands folded tightly in my lap to stop them from shaking. This was the moment. 10 years of sacrificed weekends, canceled dates, and relentless stress were about to be validated in front of the most important people in our industry. Thank you all for being here tonight. My father began, his deep voice echoing across the silent ballroom. 30 years ago, I started this logistics company with one leased truck and a dream. Today, we manage the largest commercial freight network in the state of Ohio. We have weathered economic downturns, industry shifts, and incredible challenges, but we did not just survive, we thrived. The crowd clapped politely. My father smiled, gripping the edges of the podium. But a true leader knows when it is time to look to the future. He continued, I am turning 65 next month. The world of commercial logistics is changing rapidly. It requires fresh energy. It requires bold, aggressive vision. It requires someone who understands modern disruption and synergy. I frowned slightly. Disruption and synergy were not words my father used. Those were the empty corporate buzzwords Todd constantly threw around to sound intelligent. For the past year, I have been thinking deeply about the legacy of Thomas Logistics. My father said, his voice swelling with pride. I realized that to take this company into the next 30 years, I needed to pass the torch. I needed to entrust my life's work to the next generation of our family. Tonight, I am officially announcing my retirement as Chief Executive Officer. My chest tightened. I took a deep breath, preparing to stand up. I felt a tear prick the corner of my eye. He was actually going to do it. And I could not be more proud, my father boomed into the microphone to announce that effective immediately, the new Chief Executive Officer of Thomas Logistics is my brilliant daughter, Chloe, and serving as her co-president will be her husband, Todd. The words hit me like a physical blow to the head. The breath was knocked completely out of my lungs. I sat frozen in my chair, staring at the stage in absolute disbelief. But my father was not finished. He pulled a thick leather-bound folder from inside his jacket. To ensure they have the full authority and resources they need to execute their modern vision, he announced to the cheering room, I have officially signed the legal transfer of the Thomas family $2 million commercial real estate estate directly to Chloe. I am also transferring complete control of our liquid cash reserves and 100% of my executive voting shares to Chloe and Todd. Please join me in welcoming the future of Thomas Logistics. The ballroom erupted into a standing ovation. 200 wealthy investors and politicians stood up, clapping and cheering. At the table beside me, Chloe squealed with delight, throwing her arms around Todd. They stood up together, waving to the crowd like celebrities, and made their way up to the stage to hug my father. Flashbulbs went off. The commercial bank officers smiled and nodded. I did not stand up. I did not clap. I sat in my $450 emerald green dress, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. He had not just passed me over for a promotion, he had completely erased me. He had taken the company I pulled out of Chapter 11 bankruptcy with my own bare hands and given it to a sister who had failed out of a public relations degree. He had handed the keys to the kingdom to a man who had just stolen $150,000 from our operating budget to lease phantom equipment. My father had used my exhausted, desperate loyalty to fix the accounting books, just so he could hand a perfectly clean company over to his golden child. I watched them posing for photos on the stage. My mother had died when I was young, leaving me desperate for my father's approval. I had spent my entire adult life trying to be the perfect, reliable daughter. I had sacrificed my youth to build his wealth, and he had just handed every single asset, every dollar, every ounce of power to the daughter who did absolutely nothing. I did not cry. The shock was too deep for tears. It bypassed sadness entirely and hardened into a block of pure freezing ice in the center of my chest. I stood up from the table. I did not make a scene. I walked quietly to the back of the ballroom, pushed through the heavy wooden doors, and stepped out into the quiet, carpeted hallway, leading to the VIP green room. I stood there in the shadows, waiting. I knew my father would come out the back way to get a drink of water, away from the flashing cameras. 10 minutes later, the door swung open. My father stepped into the hallway, loosening his bow tie and letting out a satisfied breath. He looked up and saw me standing there. For a fraction of a second, he looked guilty, but he quickly masked it with a look of irritated authority. "Sarah," he said, his voice flat, "why are you hiding out here?" "You should be inside celebrating with your sister. This is a big night for our family." I walked slowly toward him. My high heels made no sound on the thick carpet. "Chloe cannot read a profit and loss statement, Dad," I said. My voice was perfectly calm, completely devoid of emotion. "She does not know the difference between gross margin and net revenue. She does not know the names of our top 5 shipping vendors." My father sighed heavily, rolling his eyes. "Here we go again." "I told you, Sarah, you lack vision. Chloe understands branding. Todd understands aggressive expansion. They are the face of the company now. You will stay on as the senior financial controller and handle the daily numbers. They will handle the big picture. We are a team." "A team?" I repeated the word, tasting the absolute disgust in my mouth. "You made me fix the books. You made me cover up Todd's massive financial fraud so the venture capitalists would not freeze our credit line tonight. You used me to clean up their mess so you could give them my company. It is not your company." My father stepped closer, using his physical size to try and intimidate me just like he always did in his office. "It is my company. I built it, and I get to decide who inherits it." "You did not build it, Dad." I looked him dead in the eye, refusing to back down. "You drove it into bankruptcy 10 years ago. I built it. I paid the truck drivers from my own personal savings. I negotiated the commercial bridge loans. I spent 10 years working 80 hours a week for a fraction of a market salary while you bought country club memberships and Chloe partied in Italy." My father's face turned a violent shade of red. "Do not speak to me with that tone. You are an ungrateful, jealous bean counter. You have always resented your sister because she is charismatic and well-liked, and you are just a rigid, miserable workaholic. I gave you a job, I gave you a career, and this is how you thank me, by throwing a jealous tantrum in the hallway of my gala." "I am not throwing a tantrum," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "I am stating a fact. You just handed complete financial control to a man who steals from you. Within 6 months, Todd will bankrupt this logistics network, and I will not be here to fix it for you." My father laughed, a cruel, sharp sound that echoed in the empty hallway. "You think you are indispensable, Sarah. You think we cannot hire another accountant for $50,000 a year to do exactly what you do. You are nothing special. You just crunch numbers." He pointed a thick finger at my face. "In fact, since you clearly cannot support the new executive leadership of this family, I am making an executive decision right now. You are fired." I stared at him. Fired. After 10 years of bleeding for this family. Effective immediately, he continued, his voice dripping with venom. "Your access to the company servers is severed. Do not bother showing up to the corporate office on Monday. I will have security pack up your desk and mail you a box of your pens." He adjusted his suit jacket, looking at me with absolute contempt. "And since you are no longer an employee of Thomas Logistics, you no longer qualify for subsidized corporate housing. You have 30 days to vacate the family-owned apartment. I want your keys turned in by the end of the month. Now get out of my sight before you embarrass yourself any further." He turned his back on me and walked back into the ballroom. The heavy doors swung shut, cutting off the sound of the cheering crowd and the string quartet. I was completely alone in the hallway. In the span of exactly 15 minutes, my father had stripped me of my career, my income, my 10 years of grueling sacrifice, and my home. He had chosen the golden child and the fraudulent son-in-law over the daughter who had kept a roof over all of their heads. He had discarded me like a piece of broken office equipment. I walked out the side exit of the hotel and stepped into the freezing Ohio night. The rain had stopped, but the autumn air was biting and cold. I did not have a coat. I walked 3 blocks to where I had parked my reliable, sensible car. I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel while my beautiful emerald green dress pooled around my legs. I had absolutely nothing. I was 31 years old, unemployed, facing eviction, and utterly betrayed by the only family I had left. I had no husband, no children, and no safety net. My father and my sister had successfully taken everything from me. They thought they had won. They thought they had finally put the boring, rigid accountant in her place. They thought I would just quietly disappear into the night and let them enjoy their stolen millions in peace. But as I sat in the freezing car, staring out at the streetlights, a slow, dangerous calm washed over my entire body. My father and Chloe had made a massive, catastrophic miscalculation. They had fundamentally misunderstood who they were dealing with. They thought I was just a rigid bean counter who pushed papers around a desk. They forgot that I was the architect of their entire financial reality. I knew every account number. I knew every hidden offshore vendor. I knew every tax loophole Todd had illegally exploited. And more importantly, they forgot one crucial, fatal detail. A good accountant never, ever leaves the building without her personal encrypted backup hard drive. And mine was sitting right inside my purse. They wanted to throw me out into the cold, but they had absolutely no idea that I was going to use those numbers to burn their entire empire to the ground. I spent 10 years pouring my blood and my youth into our family logistics business, only to watch my father hand the keys to the empire, the $2 million estate, and all the cash reserves to my younger sister and her arrogant husband. He fired me on a brightly lit stage in front of 200 wealthy investors and gave me 30 days to pack my bags. I was erased from my own family simply because I was the responsible one who asked too many inconvenient questions. But just 2 months later, as the freezing Ohio rain battered the windows of my cheap new apartment, someone started pounding frantically on my door at midnight. It was my sister. She was soaking wet, trembling, and begging me to save them from a burning ship. What she did not tell me right then was that she and her husband had committed a massive federal crime, and they desperately needed my digital fingerprints to take the fall. Before I tell you what my sister actually did and how I used my accounting skills to completely dismantle their fraudulent plot, please take a second to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. If you enjoy stories about taking your power back, leave a comment and let me know where you are watching from and what time it is right now. I read every single comment and I love connecting with you all. Now let me take you back to the grueling weeks right after I was stripped of absolutely everything. The first few weeks after my father fired me were a blur of pure survival mode. When you have spent your entire adult life pouring every ounce of your energy and your sanity into a family business, being suddenly severed from it feels like losing a physical part of your body. I had exactly 30 days to pack up my entire life in the company-subsidized apartment. I did not shed a single tear while I packed my cardboard boxes. I was far too numb for tears. The shock of my father looking me in the eye and calling me an ungrateful burden after I had literally sacrificed my 20s to save his company from bankruptcy had frozen my emotions completely solid. I found a tiny one-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of an older brick building on the outskirts of Columbus. It smelled faintly of old paint and radiator heat. It was a massive downgrade from the spacious modern apartment my father had allowed me to rent. But as I turned the key in the lock on my first night there, I felt something I had not felt in 10 years. The apartment was completely silent. My phone was not ringing with desperate calls from angry freight dispatchers. My email was not overflowing with urgent messages from my brother-in-law, Todd, demanding cash advances for his luxury client dinners. For the first time in my entire life, I was responsible for absolutely no one but myself. I sat on my secondhand couch that first morning, drinking cheap coffee, and I realized I had to rebuild my life from absolute zero. I updated my resume on a Tuesday because I had spent a decade handling the complex corporate taxes, forensic auditing, and operational cash flow for a mid-sized commercial logistics network. My skill set was highly desirable. I knew how to find missing money. I knew how to balance massive ledgers. By Friday, I had 3 interviews lined up at top financial firms in the city. Within 2 weeks, I accepted a position as a senior corporate auditor for one of the most respected accounting firms in downtown Columbus. They offered me a starting salary of $115,000 a year with full medical benefits and a matched retirement account. When the human resources director slid the offer letter across the table, I actually had to force myself to stare at the wall so I would not cry. For 10 years, my father had paid me $42,000 a year. He constantly told me that the company could not afford market rates, all while he fully funded my sister Chloe's luxury vacations and Todd's leased sports cars. I signed the offer letter right there on the spot. The emotional toll of being completely erased by my family was incredibly heavy. There were nights I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how people who were supposed to love you could just throw you away like broken office equipment. But the peace of my new life was intoxicating. I established a routine that was entirely my own. I woke up at 6 in the morning, made my breakfast, and drove to my new office. I sat at a clean, quiet desk, surrounded by other professionals who actually respected my work. I analyzed corporate tax files, traced financial variances, and prepared audit reports for clients who looked me in the eye and said thank you. I was no longer the family punching bag. I was no longer the invisible workhorse. When the clock struck 5, I packed up my laptop and went home. I did not work on weekends. I bought fresh groceries. I started reading novels again. I slept for 8 uninterrupted hours every single night. I did not reach out to my father. I did not block his number simply because a small wounded part of me wanted to see if he would ever call to apologize, or even just to check if his oldest daughter was surviving. My phone remained completely silent. Chloe never texted. Todd never emailed. They were far too busy playing chief executive officers and spending the massive liquid cash reserves I had painstakingly built up over the last decade. It was as if I had died, and they were perfectly happy to keep dancing on my grave. But the commercial logistics industry in Ohio is a very small world. Secrets do not stay hidden for long, especially when they involve large sums of missing money. About 2 months into my new life, I started hearing the rumblings through the grapevine. It started innocently enough. I was having lunch at a deli near my office when I ran into Mike. Mike was a regional manager for one of the largest commercial tire suppliers in the Midwest. Thomas Logistics had been buying heavy-duty tires from his company for 15 years. I had personally negotiated our bulk rate contracts with him every single January. I knew his wife's name. I knew where his kids went to college. When Mike saw me waiting for my sandwich, he looked incredibly relieved and then deeply confused. He walked over to my table and asked me why I had not returned his emails or his phone calls for the past 6 weeks. I politely explained that I was no longer with Thomas Logistics and that he needed to speak directly with Todd, the new co-president and chief financial officer. Mike let out a heavy, exhausted sigh and sat down in the chair across from me. He told me that Todd was not answering emails either. In fact, Todd was 90 days late on a $60,000 invoice. When Mike had finally managed to get Todd on the phone the previous week, Todd had been incredibly arrogant. Todd told Mike that Thomas Logistics was pivoting to modern vendor synergy and threatened to cancel their long-standing contract entirely if Mike kept bothering him about the overdue payments. Mike shook his head, looking genuinely worried for me. He told me that the word on the street was that Thomas Logistics was rapidly bleeding clients. Todd was alienating the old reliable vendors by trying to strong-arm them into cheaper, unverified contracts just to show an immediate profit margin to the board. Furthermore, my sister Chloe was treating the corporate office like a private country club. She was showing up at noon, taking 3-hour lunches with her friends, and using the company credit card to renovate the executive suite with expensive Italian leather furniture. Meanwhile, the actual loading dock equipment was breaking down due to a complete lack of maintenance funding. Mike heard that the veteran freight drivers were starting to quit because their payroll checks were bouncing. I listened to all of this while calmly sipping my iced tea. Just a few months ago, hearing that the company was in financial trouble would have sent me into a full-blown panic attack. I would have rushed back to the office, logged into the accounting software, negotiated payment plans with the vendors, and worked until midnight to patch the holes Todd was tearing in the hull of the ship. I would have saved them just like I always did, because I believed that protecting the family business was my ultimate duty. But as I sat there looking at Mike, I felt absolutely nothing but a cold clinical detachment. It was not my problem anymore. My father had stood on a stage and told 200 people that Todd and Chloe were the brilliant future of the company. He had fired me and kicked me out of my home. He had made his choice. Now he was going to have to live with the financial consequences of handing a multi-million-dollar logistics network to a man who stole money and a woman who could not even read a basic profit and loss statement. I politely told Mike that I was truly sorry to hear about his unpaid invoices, but I had absolutely no authority or desire to intervene. I paid for my lunch, wished him the best of luck, and walked back to my clean, quiet office. I actively chose to ignore the impending collapse of the Thomas family empire. I focused entirely on my own healing. I focused on my new clients, my steady paycheck, and the overwhelming relief of not being responsible for their toxic incompetence. I thought I was finally safe. I truly believed I had successfully walked away and closed that dark chapter of my life forever. I was so incredibly wrong. It happened on a Tuesday night in late November. The weather in Ohio had turned violently cold. A heavy, relentless rain was pouring down, freezing, as it hit the pavement outside my apartment building. It was the kind of night where you stay inside, lock the deadbolts, and turn the radiator heat all the way up. I was sitting on my secondhand couch in the middle of my small living room, wrapped in a thick wool blanket. I had a cup of hot chamomile tea resting on the coffee table. My laptop was open on my knees, and I was peacefully reviewing a complex corporate tax file for one of my firm's biggest clients. The television was playing softly in the background, showing a late-night cooking program. The clock on the wall read exactly midnight. The entire apartment building was silent except for the rhythmic drumming of the rain against the glass. I was completely relaxed. I felt secure, valued, and entirely in control of my own destiny. Then the pounding started. It was not a polite knock. It was loud, frantic, and violently desperate. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet apartment, making me jump so hard I nearly spilled my hot tea all over my laptop keyboard. The heavy thumping against the wooden door did not stop. It kept going, accompanied by the muffled sound of a woman crying and frantically calling my name. My heart hammered against my ribs. I set my laptop aside and slowly stood up, my bare feet cold against the hardwood floor. I did not have many friends in Columbus yet, and absolutely no one knew my new address except for my human resources department and the post office. I walked cautiously toward the front door, the frantic pounding growing louder and more urgent with every single step. I leaned forward and pressed my eye against the small brass peephole. The hallway outside was dimly lit by a flickering fluorescent bulb, but I could see her clearly. It was Chloe. My golden child sister was standing in the hallway, looking absolutely nothing like the smug, radiant chief executive officer who had celebrated my downfall at the anniversary gala 2 months ago. Her expensive designer winter coat was soaked completely through with freezing rain. Her blonde hair, perfectly styled, was plastered to her face in wet, tangled strands. Black mascara was running down her pale cheeks in thick, dark streaks. She was shivering uncontrollably, her arms wrapped tightly around her stomach. She kept looking wildly over her shoulder down the empty hallway, as if she truly believed someone was chasing her. She pounded on the door again, her fist hitting the wood with a dull, heavy thud. "Sarah." She sobbed, her voice muffled through the heavy door. "Sarah, please open the door. I know you are in there. Please, you have to let me in." I stood completely still in my dark entryway, my hand hovering over the deadbolt lock. Every instinct I had developed over the last 31 years screamed at me to open the door, to comfort her, to fix whatever massive disaster she had managed to create. I had spent my entire life cleaning up her messes, but the new version of me, the auditor who had learned the hard way that family loyalty was just another word for exploitation, hesitated. I slowly turned the deadbolt and pulled the door open just a few inches, keeping the heavy chain lock firmly attached to the frame. The cold air from the hallway rushed in, bringing with it the smell of damp wool and panic. Chloe practically collapsed against the door frame when she saw me. She reached a shaking hand through the narrow gap, trying to grab the sleeve of my shirt. "Sarah!" She gasped, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. "Oh my God, thank you. You have to help me. You are the only one who can save us." I looked at her, my face completely expressionless. "Save you from what, Chloe?" She pressed her face near the gap in the door, her eyes wide with a kind of primal terror I had never seen in her before. "They are going to take everything," she whispered, her voice trembling so badly I could barely understand her over the sound of the rain hitting the window behind me. Todd made a mistake, a really big mistake with the company bank accounts. Dad does not know how bad it is. If the bank finds out, we are going to lose the house, the cars, the company, everything. I stared at her through the crack in the door. A mistake with the bank accounts. In my world of corporate finance and forensic auditing, there are no mistakes that result in a company losing absolutely everything overnight. There is only fraud. Chloe looked at me with those wide, pleading eyes that had gotten her everything she ever wanted our entire lives. "Please, Sarah," she begged, fresh tears spilling over her eyelashes. "I know Dad was mean to you. I know it was unfair, but we are family. I need you to log into the internal server right now. I just need you to tweak the third quarter tax filings. Just shift some numbers around to cover the shortfall until Todd can secure a new commercial line of credit. You know how to do it. You always know how to do it. If you do not help me, I am going to go to jail." I stood there in the doorway, looking at the sister who had happily stolen my life's work, who was now begging me to commit federal tax evasion to save her from her own boundless greed. She still had not told me exactly what Todd had done, but my auditor's intuition was already screaming at me like a fire alarm. This was not a desperate plea for sisterly help. This was a calculated trap. And as I looked into her terrified, calculating eyes, I realized that the Thomas family empire was not just falling apart. It was already an active crime scene. The heavy pounding against my front door echoed like a gunshot in the quiet apartment. I jumped from the couch and nearly spilled my hot chamomile tea. The television played a cooking show in the background, but the sudden violent knocking drowned out every other sound. I glanced at the wall clock. It was exactly midnight. Outside, a freezing autumn rain was hammering against the glass. I did not have many friends in Columbus yet. Nobody knew where I lived except my new employer. I walked slowly across the hardwood floor. My bare feet felt cold. The knocking grew more frantic. A woman was crying outside, calling my name over and over. I pressed my eye against the brass peephole. The hallway was poorly lit, but I could see her clearly. It was my younger sister. Chloe stood shivering under the flickering fluorescent light. She looked absolutely nothing like the radiant, smug chief executive officer who had celebrated my downfall at the company anniversary gala just 2 months ago. Her designer winter coat was completely soaked. The heavy fabric clung to her frame. Her blonde hair, usually styled to absolute perfection, was plastered to her forehead in wet tangles. Thick streaks of black mascara ran down her pale cheeks and stained her collar. She kept looking wildly down the empty hallway as if someone were chasing her. She hit the wood again. Her voice was muffled but thick with panic. "Sarah, please open the door. I know you are in there. You have to let me in." Every instinct I had developed over my 31 years screamed at me to comfort her. I had spent my entire life cleaning up her messes. When she wrecked her first car, I paid the deductible. When she failed her college courses, I helped rewrite her essays. But the new version of me hesitated. The auditor who had learned the hard way that family loyalty was just a disguise for exploitation kept her hand firmly on the lock. I turned the deadbolt and opened the door just a few inches. I left the heavy security chain attached to the frame. A gust of freezing air rushed into my living room, carrying the smell of wet wool and cheap perfume. Chloe grabbed the edge of the door with shaking hands. "Oh my God, thank you," she gasped. "Sarah, please, let me inside. I am freezing." I looked at her without any emotion. "How did you get this address, Chloe?" "I looked in the human resources employee files before Dad deleted your profile." She pressed her face near the narrow opening. "Please, you're the only one who can save us." I stared at the sister who had happily taken my life's work. I unhooked the chain and pulled the door open. She stumbled over the threshold, and practically collapsed into my small entryway. She wrapped her arms around her stomach and shivered violently. Puddles of rainwater immediately began to form on my clean floor. I closed the door and locked it behind her. "Save you from what?" I asked quietly. Chloe leaned against the wall and started sobbing. It was not a delicate, polite cry. It was a deep, ugly, hysterical sound. "They are going to take everything," she wailed. "Dad does not know how bad it is. If the bank finds out, we are going to lose the house. We are going to lose the cars and the company. We will have absolutely nothing." I crossed my arms over my chest. I did not offer her a towel. I did not offer her a warm drink. I simply watched her fall apart. In the world of corporate finance, there are no simple mistakes that result in a multi-million-dollar logistics company losing everything overnight. There is only catastrophic mismanagement or deliberate fraud. "Calm down," I commanded. My voice held the strict authority I used during hostile tax audits. "Stop crying and tell me exactly what happened." She wiped her face with the back of her wet sleeve. "Todd made a mistake," she stammered. "A really big mistake with the company bank accounts. The vendor payments were piling up. The truck drivers were threatening to strike because their payroll bounced. Todd panicked. He tried to fix it, but the money got tangled up." Money does not get tangled up, Chloe. Money is either in the account or it is gone. Where is the money? She looked at the floor and refused to meet my eyes. "It is just a temporary cash flow issue. We just need to buy some time. Todd is negotiating a massive new commercial line of credit with a private equity firm in Chicago. It will cover all the missing funds. Everything will be completely fine by next month. We just need to get through the end of this quarter." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. A cash flow issue. That was the exact same lie my father had tried to feed me when Todd stole $150,000 to lease phantom equipment. They had not learned a single lesson. They had simply accelerated their destructive behavior. "If Todd is securing a new credit line," I said slowly, "then what do you need me for?" Chloe looked up. Her blue eyes were wide and pleading. She reached out and grabbed my wrist. Her fingers were ice cold. "The quarterly tax filings are due on Friday. The bank requires certified copies of our balance sheets to approve the new loan, but the numbers do not match the current accounts. We cannot submit them like this." I pulled my wrist away from her grip. "Then Todd needs to explain the variance to the bank." "He cannot do that!" She was begging now. The tears flowed freely again. "Sarah, if the bank sees the true numbers, they will call in all of our existing loans. They will foreclose on the family estate. Todd will go to jail. I will go to jail. Please, you know how our systems work. You built them. I just need you to log into the company portal tonight. Secretly, nobody will ever know." I stared at her in absolute disbelief. "You want me to log into the servers of a company that fired me just to tweak the tax filings?" she pleaded. She dropped to her knees right there on my hardwood floor. "Just shift some numbers around. Reclassify a few operational expenses to cover the shortfall. Just make the balance sheet look healthy enough to pass the preliminary bank review. You always know how to do it. You are a genius with the ledgers. It will only take you an hour." The sheer audacity of her request took my breath away. She was not just asking for a favor. She was asking me to commit federal tax fraud. She wanted me to manipulate official financial documents and present them to a commercial lending institution. She wanted me to risk my entire career, my certified public accountant license, and my own freedom to cover up whatever massive crime her husband had committed. "Get up, Chloe." My voice dropped to a harsh whisper. She stayed on her knees. She grabbed the hem of my shirt. "Please, Sarah, I know Dad was awful to you. I know it was completely unfair. But we are family. You have to remember family loyalty. We share the same blood. You cannot just let me go to prison." I looked down at the top of her wet blonde head. All the anger I had buried over the last 2 months suddenly rose to the surface. It was not a fiery, explosive rage. It was a cold, absolute certainty. Family, loyalty. I repeated the words like they tasted bitter in my mouth. "Let me tell you about family loyalty, Chloe." I stepped back, forcing her to let go of my shirt. She looked up at me with a pathetic, trembling lip. "Family loyalty is working 70-hour weeks for 10 years while you failed your college classes," I said. My voice was dangerously calm. Loyalty is sacrificing my own credit score to secure emergency bridge loans so you could continue taking luxury vacations. Loyalty is fixing Todd's embezzlement right before the gala so our father could proudly hand you the company I built. Chloe flinched. Sarah, please. Do not interrupt me. I pointed a finger at her tear-stained face. You stood on that stage and cheered while our father fired me. You took the $2 million estate. You took all the liquid cash reserves. You watched me pack my boxes and get evicted from my apartment, and you did not say a single word to defend me. Family loyalty died at the gala, Chloe. You killed it. She buried her face in her hands and sobbed loudly. I am sorry. I am so sorry. I was stupid and greedy, but I am begging you. If you do not log in and certify those documents, the Internal Revenue Service is going to audit us. They are going to take my home. Then you better start packing your boxes. I walked over to the front door and opened it wide. The cold wind blew into the hallway. Because I am not committing a federal crime to save you from your own incompetence. Chloe scrambled to her feet. She looked horrified. You are just going to throw me out in the rain. Your own sister. You threw me out of the family, I reminded her. I am just returning the favor. Now get out of my apartment. She stood frozen in the entryway for a long moment. The mask of the terrified, helpless little sister slowly slipped away. Her face hardened into an expression of pure, desperate panic. You do not understand, she yelled. Her voice echoed out into the quiet hallway. We had to leverage the commercial real estate loan. Todd said the equipment equity would cover it. If the bank sees the forged guarantee, it is over. I went perfectly still. The blood drained entirely from my face. I stepped toward her and grabbed her by the shoulders. What commercial real estate loan? What equipment equity? Chloe realized she had said too much. She tried to pull away from me, her eyes darting toward the open door. Nothing, just a business loan. Let me go, Sarah. What forged guarantee, Chloe? I shook her shoulders hard. Tell me exactly what Todd did. She shoved me away and stumbled out into the hallway. Forget it, she cried, backing toward the stairwell. If you will not help me, then stay out of it. We will find another way. She turned and ran down the stairs. I heard her wet shoes slapping against the concrete steps. The heavy metal door at the bottom of the stairwell slammed shut, plunging the building back into silence. I stood alone in my doorway. The cold wind bit through my thin shirt. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I slowly closed the door and locked the deadbolt. I walked back into my living room and sat down on the second-hand couch. My mind was racing. A commercial real estate loan. Equipment equity. A forged guarantee. My auditor's intuition flared like a bright warning siren. Chloe's story did not make sense. You do not ask a fired employee to secretly tweak tax filings just to buy time on a cash flow problem. You do not risk begging an estranged sister unless you desperately need something only she can provide. She had not come here for my financial advice. She had come here for my digital signature. If I had logged into their server tonight to alter those tax documents, my unique administrative credentials would have been stamped all over the official revisions. I would have been the last certified public accountant to touch the balance sheets before they went to the bank. I would have been the one certifying the fraudulent numbers. I stood up from the couch. My hands were completely steady now. The sadness and betrayal I had carried for 2 months evaporated into thin air. It was replaced by a sharp, clinical focus. I walked into my bedroom and opened the bottom drawer of my dresser. Beneath a stack of heavy winter sweaters, I found a small fireproof lockbox. I unlocked it and pulled out a silver external hard drive. It was the personal backup drive I had updated the night before my father fired me. It contained a decade of historical financial data vendor contracts and baseline asset valuations for Thomas Logistics. I carried the drive back to the living room and plugged it into my laptop. The screen illuminated my dark apartment. If Todd had taken out a massive commercial real estate loan against the company equipment, the preliminary paperwork would have started months ago. The digital footprint would be buried somewhere in the historical ledgers. And if he had forged a guarantee, he would need the credentials of someone with the legal authority to bind the company assets. someone like the senior financial controller. I opened the main database and began to dig. I did not care that it was 1 in the morning. I did not care that I had to be at my new job in 6 hours. I traced the capital asset accounts. I cross-referenced the equipment serial numbers against public lending registries. I ran a forensic search on every major bank inquiry made in the weeks leading up to the gala. Hours passed. The rain outside slowly turned to a freezing drizzle. My eyes burned from staring at the bright screen, but I could not stop. The numbers were telling a story, and the story was horrifying. By 4 in the morning, I found the hidden subfolder. It was disguised as an archived maintenance log, but the metadata showed it had been created by Todd's user account. I cracked the basic password protection in less than 3 minutes. I opened the primary document inside the folder. It was a digital copy of a loan application submitted to a major commercial bank in Chicago. The loan amount was a staggering $1.2 million. The collateral listed was the entire heavy-duty freight fleet of Thomas Logistics. But that was not the part that made my blood run cold. I scrolled down to the final page of the application. The guarantor signature line required the authorization of a certified accounting professional to verify the unencumbered status of the assets. Right there, dated 1 week after I had been fired and stripped of all my authority, was my name, my certified public accountant license number, and a perfect digital forgery of my signature. I leaned back against the couch cushions. The truth washed over me in a wave of absolute clarity. Chloe had not come to my apartment tonight because she was desperate for my help to save the company. She had come to my apartment because they were drowning in a federal crime, and they needed my digital fingerprints on the current tax filings to complete the frame job. They had stolen a $1.2 million. And when the inevitable federal audit arrived, the paper trail was designed to point directly to me. They did not just want to erase me from the family. They wanted to send me to federal prison so they could keep the money. I looked at the forged signature on my screen. I did not cry. I did not panic. A slow, dangerous smile crept across my face. They thought I was just an obedient workhorse who would take the fall. They thought I would blindly log into the system to save my terrified little sister. They had made a fatal mistake. They had handed a forensic auditor the exact weapon needed to destroy them. I reached for my cell phone. It was time to build a trap of my own. I stood in the dark entryway of my apartment for a long time after my sister ran down the stairs. The sound of the heavy metal door slamming shut at the bottom of the stairwell echoed in my ears, leaving behind a thick, suffocating silence. The cold air from the hallway still lingered on my skin. I slowly turned the deadbolt, sliding the metal chain securely into its track. I walked back into my small living room, the freezing rain continuing to batter the window panes like a relentless drumbeat. My hands were perfectly steady now. The initial shock of seeing Chloe shivering on my doorstep had completely evaporated. The deeply ingrained instinct to comfort her, the lifelong habit of cleaning up her disastrous messes, had burned away entirely. It was replaced by something sharp, cold, and intensely focused. Chloe had panicked in the hallway. In her terror, she had used specific terminology that someone with her profound lack of financial literacy would never know unless she was repeating it directly from a legal document. A commercial real estate loan, equipment equity, a forged guarantee. You do not leverage heavy machinery equity by accident. You do not secure a massive commercial loan because of a simple cash flow overlap. You do it deliberately, and you do it with a calculated, orchestrated plan. I did not sit back down on the secondhand couch. I did not finish my hot tea. I walked straight into my bedroom, knelt on the hardwood floor, and pulled out the bottom drawer of my dresser. Hidden beneath a stack of heavy winter sweaters was a small fireproof lockbox. I turned the key and retrieved a silver external hard drive. It was my personal backup drive. For 10 grueling years, I had managed every single penny that flowed through Thomas Logistics. I had negotiated the vendor contracts, depreciated the massive physical assets, and balanced the complex quarterly ledgers. Because I knew my father was dangerously erratic, and my brother-in-law Todd was completely reckless, I had always kept a meticulous historical backup of our financial architecture, updating it weekly to protect my own professional liability. The last update had been performed the exact night before my father fired me. I carried the silver drive into the living room and plugged it into my laptop. The screen glowed brightly, casting harsh shadows across my face in the dark apartment. I was no longer the discarded, invisible daughter. I was a senior corporate forensic auditor, and I was about to dissect my family's empire piece by piece. The digital archive booted up with a soft hum. I opened the master database and began the grueling process of forensic tracing. In the world of commercial logistics, a company's greatest financial strength is its physical fleet. The heavy-duty 18-wheelers, the specialized refrigeration trailers, the massive loading dock hydraulic systems. These are tangible, depreciating assets that commercial banks look at when determining the financial health and lending capacity of an operation. I started by pulling the baseline asset valuations from my last official day at the company. According to my pristine records, Thomas Logistics owned the physical equipment outright. I had spent years meticulously paying off the original financing notes. The fleet was free and clear of any primary liens, which was the only reason the company had remained solvent during the economic downturns. I opened a secondary window on my browser and logged securely into the Ohio Secretary of State Commercial Registry. If Todd had messed with the corporate bank accounts, if he had leveraged company assets to cover his own incompetence, there would be an undeniable public footprint. Banks do not hand over large sums of cash without legally securing their interests through uniform commercial code filings. I typed the official corporate name of our family business into the public database. I hit enter. The system took a few agonizing seconds to load. When the results populated on my screen, all the breath rushed out of my lungs in a single painful gasp. There was a brand new uniform commercial code filing attached to the corporate entity. It was an active primary lien. I clicked on the digitized document to expand the details. My eyes scanned the dense legal text translating the banking jargon with terrifying speed. A major commercial lending institution based in Chicago had registered a massive security interest against Thomas Logistics. I scrolled down to the collateral description. They had not just leveraged a few delivery trucks. Todd and Chloe had put up the entire heavy-duty freight fleet, every single forklift, and the physical warehouse operating equipment as direct collateral. I looked at the principal loan amount registered on the public filing, $1.2 million. I pushed my chair back from the coffee table. The numbers swam in front of my eyes. $1.2 million. It was a staggering, catastrophic amount of debt. The logistics company simply did not have the profit margins to sustain the monthly servicing payments on a commercial loan of that magnitude. To take out a loan that massive against the foundational assets of the company was absolute financial suicide. It meant Todd and Chloe had effectively sold the entire operational capacity of our family business to a bank in Chicago, and they had likely spent the cash infusion immediately to cover up whatever massive deficits Todd had previously created. I stood up and paced across the small living room. The rain was turning to freezing sleet outside, rattling against the glass. I rubbed my temples, trying to force my brain to process the sheer scale of their unmitigated greed. But my auditor's intuition, that persistent nagging voice that had kept the company out of bankruptcy for a decade, told me to sit back down and look much closer. The puzzle was missing a crucial, devastating piece. Todd was a smooth talker, but he was not an administrative genius. He could not just walk into a major commercial bank, ask for over $1 million, and walk out with a cashier's check. Commercial banking is an industry built on severe risk mitigation and endless verification. It requires an exhaustive due diligence period. It requires certified financial statements covering multiple quarters. It requires formal corporate resolutions. And most importantly, it requires the signature of the primary financial officers and the legal guarantor of the assets. I leaned forward, my face inches from the glowing screen. I checked the execution date on the public lien filing. The loan was officially dispersed, and the lien was registered exactly 1 week after the anniversary gala. 1 week after my father had stood on a brightly lit stage, proudly announced Chloe as the new chief executive officer and fired me without a penny of severance. That timeline was completely impossible. A commercial loan of $1.2 million takes at least 45 to 60 days of rigorous underwriting to process. The bank would require extensive historical audits. They would require physical asset appraisals. They would demand a mountain of signed paperwork to verify the unencumbered status of the freight fleet. If the loan officially closed 1 week after I was fired, that meant the application process had to have started long before the gala. It meant the application had actively progressed while I was still the senior financial controller. I frantically navigated back to my external hard drive. I opened the internal communication logs and the hidden network subfolders that I had backed up on my final night in the office. I ran a targeted forensic search for the name of the Chicago bank listed on the lien. The search bar loaded, spinning in circles for what felt like an eternity. Finally, a single hidden directory popped up on my screen. The folder was deliberately disguised under a generic label meant for routine facility maintenance logs, but the metadata clearly showed it had been created by Todd's administrative user account 2 months prior to the gala. I cracked the basic password protection in less than 30 seconds. I opened the main document inside the hidden folder. It was a scanned digital copy of the preliminary commercial loan application. I scrolled furiously past the corporate history, past the wildly inflated revenue projections Todd had clearly fabricated straight to the final page, the signature page. The lending bank required a certified professional to legally guarantee the financial disclosures and authorize the encumbrance of the assets. Right there, stamped clearly on the bottom line, was my name. My full legal name, my official certified public accountant license number, and a perfect digital forgery of my signature. I stared at the screen until my eyes physically burned. The blood roaring in my ears sounded like a freight train. Todd had not just applied for a disastrous corporate loan. He had stolen my professional identity to do it. He had used my credentials, the spotless reputation I had spent 10 agonizing years building, to secure $1.2 million of fraudulent cash. My father had fired me and completely severed my access to the company servers, right before the final loan documents were officially submitted to the underwriters. They had deliberately removed me from the building, so I would not be there to intercept the final bank communications, and my father had allowed it. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow to the chest. My father had called me an ungrateful burden at the gala. He had humiliated me in front of 200 people to justify pushing me out the door. It was not just blind favoritism for his golden child. It was a calculated, carefully orchestrated elimination. They needed the money to fund their luxurious lifestyle, and they desperately needed a fall guy. I was the perfect target. I was the registered financial controller on file during the entire application period. Now the staggering weight of Chloe's midnight visit finally made sense. She had stood shivering in my hallway, sobbing about a mistake with the bank accounts, begging me to remember family loyalty. She had begged me to secretly log into the company portal to tweak the third quarter tax filings. She claimed they just needed to buy some time. It was a lie, a beautiful, desperate, terrifying lie. Chloe had not come to my apartment tonight because she was desperate for my help to save the family company. She had come to my apartment because they were drowning in a massive federal crime, and they needed my digital fingerprints on the current tax filings to complete the frame job. If I had listened to her tears, if I had let my deeply ingrained sisterly guilt win, I would have logged into that internal server tonight. I would have made adjustments to their current tax documents using my unique administrative login credentials. My digital fingerprints would have been permanently stamped all over their active financial records. I would have unknowingly recertified their fraudulent balance sheets, actively covering up the missing $1.2 million. And when the federal auditors and the bank investigators inevitably came knocking, the entire digital paper trail would point directly to me. Todd and Chloe could simply claim that their disgruntled fired sister had hacked into the system and committed the fraud out of pure spite. They would keep the stolen money, and I would be the one going to federal prison for wire fraud and document forgery. The profound, breathtaking cruelty of their plan extinguished the last remaining spark of love I had for my family. The sadness and the grief of being discarded vanished entirely, leaving behind a vast frozen wasteland of absolute clarity. They had built an elaborate, devastating trap designed to destroy my life just to save their own skin. They viewed my freedom as an acceptable sacrifice for their greed. I slowly closed my laptop. The apartment plunged into total darkness, save for the faint orange glow of the streetlights filtering through the icy window. I did not need to run. I did not need to hide. I was a forensic auditor holding the exact map of their destruction, but I knew that digital breadcrumbs and a forged signature on a hard drive were not enough to ensure they faced the full magnitude of justice. I needed absolute, undeniable proof of their malicious intent before I could strike back. I needed them to confess out loud, and I knew exactly how to make them do it. I stared at the forged signature on my glowing laptop screen until my eyes physically burned. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal settled heavily over my shoulders. My father and my sister had not just discarded me from the family. They had actively framed me for a $1.2 million federal crime. They desperately needed my administrative credentials stamped on the current tax filings to seal their elaborate trap. If I logged into the company portal remotely from my apartment, like Chloe had begged me to do, the digital audit trail would show that the disgruntled former accountant had tampered with the official balance sheets. I would go directly to federal prison. They would keep the stolen cash. I needed undeniable physical proof of their malicious intent. Digital breadcrumbs on a backup drive were a good start, but a seasoned corporate defense attorney could easily spin them in court. I needed to catch them confessing out loud. The very next morning, I drove my reliable car to a large electronics store on the opposite side of Columbus. I walked straight to the personal security aisle and purchased a high-end voice-activated digital audio recorder. It was incredibly small, barely the size of a standard matchbox, equipped with a highly sensitive, multi-directional microphone. I paid for the device entirely in cash. I took it back to my quiet apartment, charged the battery fully, and tested it by whispering from the other side of my living room. The audio playback was crystal clear. At exactly 6 o'clock that evening, I picked up my cell phone and dialed my sister. Chloe answered on the very first ring. Sarah. Her voice was breathless, thick with a desperate, trembling hope. Please, tell me you thought about it. Please tell me you will help us. I took a slow, deep breath. I channeled every ounce of the naive, blindly loyal older sister I used to be. I played the part of the obedient workhorse who had spent 10 years fixing every single mistake she ever made. I forced my voice to sound exhausted and completely defeated. I thought about it, Chloe, I said softly. I cannot stand the idea of you losing your beautiful home. I do not want the family company to collapse. I am willing to help you tweak the tax filings. Oh my God, she sobbed loudly into the receiver. I could hear the sheer relief pouring out of her. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah. You have no idea what this means to me. I knew you would not abandon your own family. I swallowed the bitter taste pooling in my mouth. But there is a strict condition, I said, letting a firm tone enter my voice. I cannot just change numbers remotely based on what you are telling me over the phone. It is far too risky for my professional license. If I am going to adjust the official balance sheets, I need to see the physical accounting ledgers. I need to look at the hard copies in our father's office to understand exactly where Todd moved the money. Chloe hesitated, her breath hitched in her throat. Dad and Todd do not want anyone inside the corporate office. They are really paranoid right now. Then you will have to figure out this massive disaster entirely by yourself, I said, allowing a cold finality to clip my words. I am not committing blind financial fraud. Either I see the physical ledgers tonight, or I hang up this phone and block your number. Wait! She panicked, her words rushing out in a frantic blur. Okay, I can get you inside the building. Todd and Dad have a very long dinner meeting tonight with a potential venture capital investor. The corporate office will be completely empty by 8 o'clock. I still have my executive master keycard. I can sneak you in through the rear loading dock entrance. I will meet you by the back security gate at exactly 8:30, I replied. Do not tell anyone I am coming. If Todd finds out I am there, I will walk away completely. I will not tell a single soul, she promised fervently. I will see you tonight. I ended the call and set the phone down on my kitchen counter. The trap was perfectly set. The drive to Thomas Logistics took exactly 40 minutes. The Ohio night was pitch black and bitterly cold. A freezing winter drizzle coated the windshield of my car. I turned the heater all the way up, but the deep chill radiating through my bones had absolutely nothing to do with the freezing weather. I was driving back to the logistics empire I had single-handedly saved from bankruptcy, but tonight, I was arriving as an invisible intruder. I pulled into the dark industrial park just past 8:30. The massive commercial warehouse loomed like a shadow against the cloudy sky. The long rows of heavy-duty freight trucks sat silent and still under the yellow glow of the perimeter security lights. These were the exact same trucks Todd had illegally leveraged to steal over $1 million. I parked my car 2 streets away in a poorly lit retail lot and walked the rest of the distance on foot. I wore a dark winter coat and kept my head down. I did not want the exterior security cameras recording my face. Chloe was waiting for me by the heavy metal door near the loading dock. She looked genuinely terrified. She was wearing a dark hooded sweatshirt, glancing nervously around the empty, rain-slicked parking lot. When she saw me approaching from the shadows, she let out a loud breath of pure relief. She swiped her executive keycard against the electronic wall reader. The heavy steel door clicked open with a loud, metallic thud. We stepped inside the cavernous warehouse. The familiar smell of diesel fuel, damp cardboard, and cold concrete instantly filled my lungs. It was a smell I had known intimately for 10 grueling years. We walked silently through the shadowed loading bays, our wet shoes echoing faintly on the hard floor. We climbed the steep metal staircase leading up to the second-floor executive suites. The corporate hallway was dark and quiet. The only illumination came from the red exit signs glowing at the far ends of the corridor. Chloe unlocked the heavy oak door to our father's expansive corner office. We stepped inside the room and she quickly locked the door behind us. She reached over and turned on a small brass desk lamp. The dim light cast long, nervous shadows across the wood-paneled walls. The office was exactly as I remembered it from 2 months ago. The massive mahogany desk dominated the center of the room. The expensive leather chairs sat empty. The framed photographs on the walls proudly showed my father shaking hands with local politicians and wealthy bankers. There were absolutely no pictures of me. "The physical ledgers are locked in the bottom drawer," Chloe whispered, pointing a shaking finger toward the heavy filing cabinet in the corner. "Todd locked it yesterday, but I found the spare key hidden inside his leather briefcase." She handed me a small brass key. My hands were perfectly steady as I took it from her palm. I walked over to the cabinet, unlocked the bottom drawer, and pulled out the thick leather-bound accounting books. I carried them over to my father's desk and spread them out under the warm circle of the lamplight. I opened the heavy pages and pretended to study the handwritten columns. I already knew exactly what was inside these books. I had spent the entire previous night tracing the digital copies hidden on my personal backup drive, but I desperately needed to buy some time. I needed a reason to execute the real purpose of my visit. I traced my index finger slowly down the columns of fabricated numbers. Todd had done a truly pathetic job of hiding his criminal tracks in the physical books. He had simply crossed out major operational expenses and penciled in vague categories like strategic vendor acquisitions. It was deeply insulting to my profession. "This is a massive, complicated mess, Chloe," I said, keeping my voice low and tight with manufactured stress. "The financial variances are absolutely everywhere. It is going to take me at least an hour to reconcile these lines before I can even think about logging into the central server." Chloe wrung her hands together nervously. Her blue eyes were wide with anxiety. "Just do whatever you have to do, Sarah. Please, just fix the numbers so the bank leaves us alone." I looked up at her, letting out a heavy, exhausted sigh. "I cannot focus properly. I am freezing cold from the rain and my hands are shaking. Go down the hall to the executive break room and make me a large cup of black coffee. I need caffeine if I'm going to untangle this catastrophic disaster." Chloe nodded eagerly, clearly desperate to feel useful. "Absolutely. Black coffee. I will be right back. Just please keep working." She turned around and hurried out of the office, pulling the heavy oak door shut behind her. The click of the metal latch echoed in the quiet room. I was finally alone. I did not waste a single second. I reached deep into my purse and pulled out the small digital audio recorder. I clicked the power switch on the side. A tiny red light blinked once, confirming the device was actively recording. I quickly scanned the room for the perfect hiding spot. It needed to be close enough to pick up conversations clearly, but entirely hidden from casual sight. I noticed a decorative wooden tissue box resting near the edge of my father's massive mahogany desk. I carefully lifted the box and slid the flat recording device right underneath it. The device was completely invisible, but the sensitive microphone was exposed just enough to capture every single sound in the room. I stepped back from the desk, my heart pounding a steady, heavy rhythm against my ribs. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for them to return someday and incriminate themselves on tape. But fate had a much faster, much more terrifying plan. Suddenly, the heavy silence in the office was shattered by a sharp, electronic ring. I jumped backward, startled by the sudden noise. The sound was coming directly from my father's desk phone. It rang a second time. I froze in place, staring at the flashing red light on the console. Nobody was supposed to be calling the private office line at 9 o'clock at night. Then the answering machine clicked on automatically. The speakerphone engaged with a loud beep, filling the empty office with sound. "Dad, pick up the phone." It was Todd's voice. He sounded highly agitated, speaking loudly and rapidly through the speaker. "I know you are checking the files in the conference room. Pick up the phone right now." I stood completely paralyzed. Todd and my father were not at a dinner meeting in the city. My father was somewhere else inside this very building, and Todd was calling him. A second later, I heard the sound of the adjacent conference room door opening. Heavy footsteps moved quickly toward the office. I scrambled backward in sheer panic, pressing my body into the dark shadows behind a tall wooden bookshelf. My breath caught sharply in my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying the darkness would hide my silhouette. My father walked straight into the office and approached the desk. I could smell his expensive, familiar cologne. He hit a button on the phone console. "I am here, Todd," my father said. His voice was sharp, tired, and deeply irritated. "I was just reviewing the legal disclosures next door." "What is the emergency?" I remained perfectly still in the shadows. I barely dared to breathe. The small digital recorder hidden under the tissue box was actively capturing every single word. Todd's voice echoed from the speakerphone, thick with panic and arrogance. "The bank underwriter just emailed me again. They are pushing hard for the final certified tax documents by tomorrow morning. Did Chloe get her stupid sister to agree? Is Sarah going to log into the portal tonight?" "Yes," my father replied calmly, leaning his weight against the heavy desk. "Chloe called me an hour ago. She played the crying, helpless sister routine perfectly. Sarah took the bait completely. She actually thinks she's going to save the family company. She is meeting Chloe at the back entrance right now to look at the physical ledgers." A cold, heavy wave of pure nausea washed over my entire body. Chloe had not come to my apartment out of desperation. Her tears, her panic, her begging in the hallway. It had all been a calculated performance, a carefully scripted act designed to manipulate my lingering loyalty. She was entirely in on the plot. My own younger sister was actively participating in my destruction. Todd laughed through the speaker. A cruel, ugly sound that made my skin crawl. "Once Sarah logs in and recertifies the Q3 documents, we submit it to the IRS. She is the registered CPA on file. When the audit hits, she goes to prison for the forged loan signatures, not us. Dad, you promised she would take the fall." My father did not hesitate. His voice was cold and completely devoid of any paternal warmth. "She owes us. She has no family, no husband. She can handle it to protect her sister." I closed my eyes tightly in the darkness. Hearing the actual plan spoken aloud was a million times worse than piecing it together on a glowing computer screen. They were talking about taking away my freedom. They were talking about putting me in a concrete cell for years. My father had just justified sacrificing my entire future because he believed my life had absolutely no value outside of serving him. I was nothing but a convenient, disposable human shield for his boundless greed. "Just make sure Chloe keeps her distracted until she logs into the computer terminal," my father commanded through the speakerphone. I am leaving through the front lobby right now. I will call you the second the federal documents are submitted." He hung up the phone abruptly. He grabbed a manila file folder from the desk and walked quickly out of the office. The heavy oak door clicked shut firmly behind him. I stepped out from behind the tall bookshelf. I did not collapse onto the floor. I did not shed a single tear. A profound, terrifying silence settled over my mind. The last fragile thread connecting me to the Thomas family snapped completely in half. The lingering love, the blind loyalty, the desperate lifelong need for my father's approval. It all turned to dust in a matter of seconds. I walked over to the desk. I lifted the wooden tissue box, retrieved the digital audio recorder, and slipped it safely into the deep inside pocket of my winter coat. I had the confession. I had the absolute, undeniable proof of their federal conspiracy recorded in crystal clear audio. A minute later, the office door opened again. Chloe hurried inside carrying a steaming white mug of black coffee. She smiled brightly, handing me the warm mug. "Here you go, Sarah," she said cheerfully. "Nice and hot. Are you almost ready to log into the computer and fix the numbers for us?" I looked directly at my sister. I looked at her perfect blonde hair and her innocent, wide blue eyes. I finally saw the ruthless monster hiding underneath the pretty surface. I set the coffee mug down heavily on the edge of the desk. I slowly closed the thick leather ledgers. "I need to think about it, Chloe," I said. My voice was perfectly flat, devoid of any emotion whatsoever. The discrepancies in these books are much worse than I anticipated. I cannot do this tonight. I need to go home and carefully review my personal accounting notes. Chloe dropped her smile instantly. Genuine, unfiltered panic flooded her pale face. "What do you mean you need to think about it, Sarah? You promised me. The bank needs this paperwork tomorrow morning. You have to log in right now." I picked up my purse and walked deliberately toward the door. "I am leaving, Chloe. I will call you in the morning." She reached out and tried to grab my arm, but I stepped past her effortlessly. I walked out of the office, down the dark executive hallway, and descended the metal stairs. Chloe followed closely behind me, begging and pleading, her voice echoing loudly in the empty warehouse. I ignored her completely. I pushed open the heavy loading dock door and stepped out into the freezing Ohio rain. I walked back to my parked car with purposeful, steady steps. I got into the driver's seat, locked the doors securely, and started the engine. The car heater blasted warm air across my face, thawing my frozen skin. My lingering sadness had evaporated completely. The heavy grief of losing my family was entirely gone. It was replaced by a pure, calculated, brilliant rage. They thought I was a naive, obedient workhorse. They thought I was a lonely, disposable pawn they could sacrifice to federal authorities. They desperately wanted to send me to federal prison. But they had just handed a forensic accountant a loaded weapon. It was time to permanently destroy them. I drove away from the dark Thomas Logistics warehouse, with the digital audio recorder burning a heavy hole deep inside my winter coat pocket. I did not go to the local police station. I did not call my father to scream at him or demand an explanation for his cruelty. Screaming is what helpless victims do when they feel they have absolutely no power left. I was not a helpless victim anymore. I was a highly trained corporate auditor, and I was acting as the lead architect, preparing to deliberately demolish a massive building I had spent 10 agonizing years constructing with my own bare hands. I drove back to my quiet apartment and locked the deadbolt. I did not cry. The tears had completely dried up, leaving behind a vast desert of cold, absolute certainty. I slept for exactly 4 hours. When I woke up the next morning, the freezing Ohio rain had stopped entirely, leaving the morning sky a pale, brittle gray. I made a strong pot of black coffee and opened my laptop on the kitchen counter. If you are going to take down a multi-million-dollar corporate fraud orchestrated by your own family, you do not hire a friendly neighborhood lawyer. You hire an absolute shark. I spent 2 solid hours researching the most aggressive corporate whistleblower attorneys in the entire state of Ohio. I desperately needed someone who understood complex financial litigation, federal tax law, and the brutal reality of corporate betrayal. I found a man named William Harrison. He was a former ruthless federal prosecutor who now ran a private legal firm in downtown Columbus, specializing exclusively in high-stakes corporate fraud and embezzlement. I called his private office right when their phone lines opened at 8 in the morning. His legal secretary politely told me that Mr. Harrison was entirely booked for the next 3 weeks and could not take any new consultations. I calmly told her to write down a single sentence on a piece of paper and hand it to him immediately. I told her the sentence was, "I have physical audio evidence of a $1.2 million fraudulent commercial real estate loan involving forged certified public accountant credentials." Exactly 10 minutes later, William Harrison called me back himself. His voice was deep and strictly professional. He told me to be at his office by noon today. His law office was located on the 40th floor of a sleek, glass high-rise building overlooking the entire city of Columbus. Walking into his firm felt like stepping into an entirely different world compared to the dusty concrete floors of the Thomas Logistics warehouse. The reception area smelled of expensive leather and polished mahogany wood. Mr. Harrison was a tall, intimidating man in his late 50s, with sharp gray eyes that looked right through you. He did not offer me polite small talk or a warm cup of coffee. He offered me a leather chair across from his massive glass desk and simply asked to see exactly what I had brought him. I reached into my purse and placed the small digital audio recorder on the center of the glass table. I pushed the play button. The crystal clear voices of my father and my brother-in-law filled the quiet, expensive room. We sat in absolute silence and listened to Todd laughing arrogantly about how I was the registered accountant on file. We listened to him explain his master plan to submit the fraudulent tax documents to the Internal Revenue Service, so I would go to federal prison instead of them. We listened to my father agree to the entire horrific plan, stating clearly that I owed them because I had no family and no husband to protect me. Mr. Harrison sat perfectly still while the recording played. When the audio finally ended, he did not say a single word for a very long time. He simply leaned back in his heavy leather chair and steepled his fingers together. He looked at me with a complex mixture of absolute professional respect and deep personal sympathy. "You understand exactly what they are trying to do to you, Sarah?" he finally asked. His voice was calm but heavy with the terrible weight of the law. "They are not just trying to steal $1 million from a bank. They are actively conspiring to destroy the rest of your natural life to cover their own tracks." I looked back at him without blinking once. "I know exactly what they are doing," I replied, "and I want to stop them permanently. But I know I need much more than an accidental audio recording to put them away. I need the actual paper trail to prove the execution of the crime." Mr. Harrison nodded slowly in complete agreement. "A recorded conversation strongly proves malicious intent," he explained. "But to secure federal criminal indictments, we absolutely need the physical execution of the forgery. We need to see the actual preliminary loan documents that Todd submitted to the commercial bank in Chicago." I explained to him that I no longer had any access to the company servers because my father had fired me and completely severed my administrative credentials during the anniversary gala. Mr. Harrison smiled a very cold and calculating smile. "You are the registered certified public accountant of record during the entire application period," he said. "Under strict federal banking regulations, you have the absolute legal right to request preliminary audit disclosures regarding any commercial loan that bears your professional credential. We are going to request those documents directly from the underwriting bank right now. We will use the legal guise of a routine professional compliance audit, so we do not trigger any alarms." He buzzed his paralegal and immediately instructed her to draft the formal legal request. We spent the next 3 hours sitting in his office, mapping out the entire financial architecture of Thomas Logistics. I explained the phantom equipment leases, the missing operational funds, and the massive blind spots in my sister Chloe and her husband Todd. I painted a complete detailed picture of a logistics company bleeding out from the inside due to profound incompetence and boundless greed. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the secure fax machine in the corner of Mr. Harrison's private office began to hum loudly. The heavily encrypted documents from the Chicago bank were finally arriving. The paralegal brought the thick stack of warm papers into the room and set them carefully on the desk between us. My hands were perfectly steady as I reached for the heavy file. I flipped past the generic cover letters and the fabricated corporate background summaries. I scanned the asset valuations and saw that Todd had indeed leveraged the entire heavy-duty freight fleet. He had illegally pledged every single delivery truck and warehouse forklift as direct collateral for a $1.2 million cash infusion. Then I turned to the final page of the commercial contract, the guarantor authorization page. The bank strictly required the signature of a certified accounting professional to legally verify that the corporate assets were completely free of any existing debt. I stared at the bottom line of the page, and the breath caught sharply in my throat. Seeing the fraud on a glowing digital backup drive in the middle of the night was one thing. Seeing it printed on official bank letterhead with federal loan tracking numbers stamped across the top was entirely different and profoundly terrifying. There was my full legal name printed in bold ink. There was my authentic, certified public accountant license number. And right on the dotted line was a perfect, masterful forgery of my signature. Todd had not just signed my name carelessly, he had practiced it repeatedly. He had copied the exact looping style of the letters and the sharp slants that I had used on hundreds of vendor contracts over the last 10 years. He had stolen my professional identity with terrifying and deliberate precision. I felt a sudden wave of profound nausea wash over my entire body. It was a visceral physical reaction to the sheer evil of what my own flesh and blood had done to me. I had sacrificed my entire youth to build this company. I had given up my personal savings to meet their driver payroll when times were hard, and they had used my own good name to dig my federal grave. I pushed the document across the smooth desk toward Mr. Harrison. He put on his reading glasses and studied the forged signature closely. He compared it to the authentic signature on my state driver license. He shook his head in absolute disgust. "This is a Class 1 federal felony," he said quietly. "We are looking at wire fraud, bank fraud, and aggravated identity theft." Mr. Harrison closed the thick file and folded his hands carefully on top of it. He looked at me with absolute certainty. "We have them, Sarah," he said. "We have the audio confession of the conspiracy, and we have the physical proof of the forgery. We can take this directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Division right now. I can make one phone call to the federal prosecutor, and agents will be at the Thomas Logistics warehouse by tomorrow morning. Todd will be arrested immediately. Your father will be indicted for criminal conspiracy. The bank will immediately freeze all of their accounts, and this nightmare will be over. You will be completely protected by whistleblower statutes." It was the logical choice. It was the safe, quiet choice. Most people in my terrifying position would have eagerly accepted that path and let the federal authorities handle the messy fallout. But as I sat in that quiet, expensive office, looking down at the sprawling city of Columbus, something dark and incredibly resolute settled over my heart. I thought about the 30th anniversary gala. I thought about my father standing on that brightly lit stage in front of 200 wealthy investors, praising Chloe and Todd as the brilliant future of the company while completely erasing my existence. I thought about the humiliating moment he fired me in the hallway, stripping me of my 10-year career and my home, while the string quartet played beautiful music in the background. My family had not tried to destroy me quietly in the shadows. They had humiliated me in the most public way possible. They had used an audience of industry elites to validate their cruelty. Handing them over to the police in the quiet early hours of the morning felt far too gentle. I shook my head slowly. "No," I said. My voice was incredibly calm, but it carried a sharp, dangerous edge that surprised even me. I do not want them arrested quietly. I do not want them to hide behind closed doors and pretend to their country club friends that this was just a simple accounting misunderstanding. They dismantled my entire life in front of a live audience. I want them to dismantle their own empire the exact same way. Mr. Harrison raised a thick eyebrow, clearly intrigued by my unexpected response. "What exactly do you have in mind?" he asked, leaning forward. I rested my arms on his glass desk and outlined my strategy. "They desperately need me to sign the final Internal Revenue Service tax documents by tomorrow morning," I explained. "They need my authentic digital signature to validate the forged numbers and complete the frame job before the bank audit triggers. They think I am a naive, blindly loyal daughter who is terrified of seeing her younger sister lose her luxury home. I am going to give them exactly what they want, but I am going to make them set the stage for their own total destruction." I pulled my cell phone from my purse and placed it on the desk between us. "I am going to call my father right now," I told Mr. Harrison. "I am going to tell him that I reviewed the physical ledgers last night and I am willing to fix the massive accounting errors. I am going to tell him I will sign the federal tax documents and take full personal responsibility for the missing money just to save the family from ruin." Mr. Harrison smiled a slow, dangerous smile, recognizing the brilliance of the maneuver. "And what is your condition?" he asked. "I want a formal emergency board meeting," I replied. "I want the bank loan officer who authorized this $1.2 million disaster to be sitting directly at the table. I want the top 2 venture capital investors present in the room. I will tell my father that I need to explain the complex accounting transition to them personally before I sign my professional life away. I will tell him it is the absolute only way I can clear my guilty conscience. My father is so incredibly arrogant and so desperate for the loan cash to clear that he will actually believe I am just playing the part of the noble martyr. He will eagerly assemble the very people who have the absolute power to destroy his legacy." Mr. Harrison nodded his complete approval. He reached over and tapped the screen of my cell phone. "Make the call," he said simply. I dialed my father's private office number and put the phone on loudspeaker so Mr. Harrison could hear every single word. My father answered on the second ring. His voice was thick with manufactured concern and false warmth. "Sarah," my father said softly, "Chloe told me you looked at the books last night." "Are you okay, sweetheart?" I forced my voice to tremble. I channeled all the deep pain and utter desperation I had felt for the last 10 grueling years. "Dad, the numbers are an absolute disaster," I cried into the receiver. "Todd made a terrible mistake, but I cannot let Chloe lose everything she has. I cannot let the family go to federal prison. I will sign the internal revenue documents. I will take the blame for the financial variances." My father let out a heavy breath of pure, unadulterated relief. "Oh, Sarah," he whispered, "you are saving this entire family. I knew we could count on you. I knew you were always loyal to the Thomas name." I wiped a stray, dry tear from my cheek, though my face remained completely cold and expressionless. "I will do it, Dad," I said, "but I have one strict condition. I need a formal board meeting tomorrow morning. I need the bank officer and the primary investors there in the room. I need to explain the financial restructuring to them myself to clear my conscience before I sign the final federal tax forms. If they are not sitting in the room, I will not sign anything." My father did not hesitate for a single second. Blinded by his own greed and his profound underestimation of my intelligence, he walked eagerly into the trap. "I will call them right now," he promised enthusiastically. "I will see you in the boardroom tomorrow morning, Sarah." "Thank you." I hung up the phone and looked at my lawyer. The trap was permanently locked. My family thought I was a naive martyr coming to save their burning ship. They had absolutely no idea they had just happily invited their own executioner into the building. The morning of the board meeting was bitterly cold. A thick layer of frost covered the windshield of my reliable old car. I did not rush. I sat in the driver's seat watching the ice melt under the heater. For 10 years, I had rushed every single morning. I had driven to the Thomas Logistics warehouse in the dark. I had skipped breakfast to balance ledgers, calculate depreciating assets, and answer panicked phone calls from unpaid vendors. I had lived my entire 20s in a state of constant financial emergency, working 70-hour weeks just to keep my family wealthy and comfortable. I had ruined my own credit score to secure commercial bridge loans so my father could maintain his country club membership. Today, I was arriving exactly on time. Today, I was not the invisible, obedient workhorse. I was the architect of their ruin. I wore a tailored charcoal gray suit, It was the armor I had purchased with my first paycheck from my new corporate auditing firm. It fit perfectly. It made me look like the highly paid senior financial professional. I actually was not the underpaid, exhausted daughter wearing practical shoes who hid in the back office doing the work of 3 separate departments. I parked my car in the visitor lot. I walked through the double glass doors of the corporate headquarters. The receptionist, a young woman named Brittany, looked up from her computer and gasped softly. She had been working the night of the 30th anniversary gala. She had watched my father publicly fire me, strip me of my career, and banish me from the premises. I smiled politely at her. I did not sign the visitor log. I walked straight past the front desk and headed toward the executive elevator. My heart was not racing. My palms were completely dry. The paralyzing fear that used to grip my chest whenever I had to confront my father had completely evaporated. The audio recording of his voice telling Todd that I owed them my freedom because I had no husband to protect me had burned away my fear and left behind a spine of absolute unbreakable steel. The executive boardroom at Thomas Logistics was a massive space explicitly designed to intimidate employees and impress creditors. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the sprawling freight yard below, where dozens of our heavy-duty 18-wheelers sat parked in the freezing rain. A polished mahogany table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by 20 heavy leather executive chairs. When I pushed open the double oak doors, the low murmur of conversation stopped instantly. Every single head turned to look at me. My father Thomas sat at the head of the table. He looked incredibly smug. He wore his finest custom-tailored suit and an imported silk tie. He looked like a king holding court, completely oblivious to the fact that his kingdom was built on a massive federal fraud. To his right sat my younger sister, Chloe. She wore a designer cashmere sweater and a bright, eager smile. The fake, hysterical tears from her midnight visit to my apartment were entirely gone. She looked relieved and perfectly relaxed, believing her trap had worked perfectly. Beside her sat Todd, my arrogant brother-in-law. He was tapping a gold pen against a leather folio, trying desperately to project the image of a seasoned chief financial officer. But a trained auditor notices everything. I could see the faint sheen of cold sweat on his forehead. I could see the slight nervous tremor in his hands. He knew the commercial bank deadline was hours away. He knew his $1.2 million forgery was a ticking time bomb that was about to detonate. Sitting on the opposite side of the table were the 3 men who held the actual financial power over the company. Mr. Davis, the senior commercial loan officer from the Chicago bank, sat with a thick file of preliminary underwriting documents spread out in front of him. Next to him were Richard Sterling and Paul Vance, the 2 primary venture capital investors who owned a significant minority stake in our logistics network. These were men who measured human value strictly in profit margins, quarterly returns, and risk mitigation. They looked impatient and slightly irritated by the sudden emergency meeting. They had absolutely no idea they were sitting in a room discussing a forged commercial real estate loan application. I walked slowly down the length of the room to the only empty chair at the far end of the table, directly opposite my father. I set my leather briefcase on the floor next to my feet. I did not apologize for keeping them waiting. I sat down and folded my hands neatly on the polished wood. "Sarah," my father said. His voice echoed in the quiet room. It was thick with a cloying, patronizing warmth that made my stomach churn with disgust. "Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We all truly appreciate you stepping up to the plate to help your family." I looked at him without blinking. "You requested a meeting, Dad. I am here." My father stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket and placed his hands flat on the table, leaning forward to address the bank officer and the venture capital investors. He was performing. He was putting on the greatest show of his life. "Gentlemen," my father began, his tone shifting into the smooth, confident cadence of a veteran corporate salesman. "I want to sincerely apologize for the sudden restructuring of our financial timeline this week. As you know, Thomas Logistics has recently undergone a major executive transition. Passing the torch to the next generation of leadership is a complex and delicate process. My daughter Chloe and her husband Todd have taken the helm with incredible vision and aggressive modern business strategies. They are driving this company toward unprecedented growth and massive market disruption. The venture capital investors nodded slowly, apparently satisfied with the empty corporate buzzwords. Todd puffed out his chest, looking incredibly pleased with himself. Chloe smiled sweetly at the bank loan officer batting her eyelashes. However, my father continued letting a heavy, practiced sigh escape his lips to indicate deep paternal sorrow. Massive growth requires massive capital. And during this executive transition, we discovered some unfortunate accounting irregularities in our third quarter historical ledgers. Some severe cash flow misallocations and reporting oversights that occurred under the previous financial management structure. When my father spoke about family fixing its own mistakes, a sickening wave of revulsion washed over me. For 10 years, I had been the family garbage disposal. I had swallowed their debts. I had hidden their incompetence from the Internal Revenue Service. I had sacrificed my youth so Chloe could attend luxury public relations classes and Todd could drive leased sports cars. To hear him use the word family as a weapon to destroy my future was the final validation I needed. I realized in that moment that he had never loved me. He had only loved what I could do for his bank account. He looked directly at me. The sheer unadulterated audacity of his lie was breathtaking. He was looking me in the eye in front of the most powerful men in our commercial industry and publicly blaming me for the $1.2 million hole that Todd had blown in the operational accounts. He was setting the perfect stage to make me the incompetent, disgruntled scapegoat for their federal crime. He was preparing to throw me directly under a moving freight truck. Todd cleared his throat, puffing his chest out. You see, gentlemen, Sarah has always struggled with the pressure of modern corporate finance. We tried to integrate her into our new dynamic synergy, but she simply could not keep up with the aggressive scaling models we implemented. Her old-fashioned, rigid bookkeeping methods ultimately resulted in a massive capital shortfall. It breaks our hearts to see a family member fail so publicly, but we believe in radical transparency. Sarah wants to make things right today. We are a family business, gentlemen, my father added, his voice dripping with fake nobility and grace. And family always fixes its own mistakes. Sarah was our senior financial controller for many years. She handled the daily numbers in the back office. She realizes now that the recent transition caused some severe reporting errors on her end. She has bravely come here today to take full personal responsibility for those accounting failures and to formally certify the corrected tax disclosures so we can finalize our new commercial credit line with Mr. Davis. The wealthy investors turned to look down the table at me. Richard Sterling, the older of the two venture capitalists, adjusted his expensive reading glasses and looked at me with open disdain. He was a man who had built his fortune by aggressively acquiring failing businesses and stripping them down to their copper wiring. He had no patience for emotional family drama. He just wanted clean tax filings, so his massive investment was protected. Paul Vance, the younger investor, was scrolling on his phone, completely detached from the human tragedy unfolding in front of him. They all saw exactly what my father wanted them to see. They saw a fired, disgruntled former employee who had messed up the corporate books and was now being dragged back by her magnanimous, wealthy father to clean up her own disastrous mess. They believed the narrative completely. Why would they not? My father was a master manipulator. He had spent his entire adult life building the grand illusion of the perfect, honorable American patriarch. I did not break eye contact with my father. I let the silence stretch out for 10 agonizing seconds. I wanted to remember this exact moment forever. I wanted to burn the image of his smug, victorious face into my memory so I would never, ever feel a single ounce of guilt for the devastation I was about to unleash upon his life. That is correct, Dad, I said quietly. My voice was perfectly flat, devoid of any emotion, fear, or hesitation whatsoever. I am here today to ensure the official financial records accurately reflect exactly where the money went. Chloe let out a small, audible breath of pure relief. Todd quickly opened his leather folio. He pulled out a crisp, white legal document and a sleek silver luxury pen. He slid the piece of paper across the long mahogany table toward me. It glided over the polished wood and stopped right in front of my folded hands. "Thank you, Sarah," Todd said. He tried to sound authoritative and commanding, but his voice cracked slightly, betraying his underlying panic. "This is a formal Internal Revenue Service Amendment affidavit. It legally acknowledges that the historical financial variances were the result of your direct administrative oversight and accounting errors. It completely absolves the current executive board of any liability for the previous accounting discrepancies. Once you sign this at the bottom, we can attach it to the new tax filings, and Mr. Davis can approve the commercial loan dispersal this afternoon." I looked down at the document resting on the table. It was a masterpiece of corporate self-preservation and absolute betrayal. It was a legally binding confession of gross incompetence. If I signed my name on that dotted line, I would be formally admitting to severe financial negligence. I would be legally tying my pristine certified public accountant license to their massive stolen deficit. When the federal auditors inevitably discovered that the $1.2 million was completely missing, this single piece of paper would be the golden ticket that kept Todd and Chloe out of federal prison and sent me directly into a concrete cell for wire fraud. They had orchestrated this entire morning to trap me. They had brought the bank loan officer and the primary investors here not just to witness my surrender, but to ensure I felt too intimidated and humiliated to back down. They thought I would cower under the immense weight of their collective authority. They thought my lifelong, desperate, pathetic need for my father to love me would force me to fall on my sword and blindly sign my life away to protect my younger sister. I slowly reached out and picked up the heavy silver pen. Across the table, my father smiled. It was a genuine, deeply satisfied smile. He thought he had achieved total victory. He thought he had successfully discarded me, stolen the logistics company, leveraged its entire future to a bank, and secured a permanent silent human shield for his monumental crimes. Chloe leaned back in her expensive leather chair, looking completely victorious. Todd visibly relaxed his tight shoulders, slumping slightly with profound relief. The bank loan officer, Mr. Davis, checked his heavy gold wristwatch. "If we can get this document signed and properly notarized, Ms. Thomas, we can move forward with the funding protocols before the afternoon federal wire deadline." "Of course, Mr. Davis," I said. My voice remained dangerously calm and steady. "Transparency is the absolute most important part of the commercial lending process. A bank must know exactly who and what they are financing before they release $1 million. I held the silver pen firmly in my right hand. I let the sharp tip hover just an inch above the signature line. The massive boardroom was absolutely silent. I could hear the faint hum of the ceiling climate control system. I could hear the sharp intake of breath from my sister as she eagerly waited for the final stroke of ink that would permanently secure her stolen wealthy lifestyle. I slowly placed the pen down on the table. The metallic click echoed loudly in the quiet boardroom. My father frowned. His victorious smile faltered slightly. A dark shadow of irritation crossed his aging face. "Sarah," my father warned, his tone dropping into a low, dangerous register meant to intimidate me. "Do not play childish games today. We have a very strict financial timeline. Sign the document right now." "I am not playing games, Dad," I replied. I reached down to the floor and unclasped the heavy brass locks on my leather briefcase. "In fact, I am taking this commercial audit much more seriously than you ever have." I reached into the dark briefcase and pulled out a thick bound folder. It was incredibly heavy, containing over 200 pages of devastating forensic accounting evidence, legal statutes, and strict banking regulations. I had spent the last 48 hours printing, collating, and meticulously indexing every single piece of digital evidence I had harvested from my hidden backup drive. I had included the certified copies of the forged preliminary loan documents that my ruthless whistleblower attorney, Mr. Harrison, had officially secured from the Chicago Underwriting Bank. I had also included a complete certified transcript of the audio recording where Todd and my father actively conspired to frame me for federal tax fraud. I stood up slowly from my chair. I picked up the heavy stack of thick, identical folders. I walked deliberately down the left side of the long mahogany table. "What exactly are you doing?" Todd demanded. His voice was suddenly shrill and panicked. He stood up, gripping the edge of the polished table so hard his knuckles turned white. "Sit down, Sarah. This is a private executive meeting." I ignored him completely. I stopped next to Mr. Davis, the commercial bank loan officer. I placed one of the thick bound folders directly on top of his preliminary underwriting file. Then I moved gracefully to the two venture capital investors, Richard Sterling and Paul Vance. I set a heavy sealed folder directly in front of each of them. My father was staring at me, his face turning a violent shade of crimson red. "Sarah, I order you to sit down immediately and sign that confession." I walked back to my chair at the far end of the table. I did not sit down. I stood tall, smoothing the front of my charcoal blazer. I looked at the powerful, wealthy men sitting on the left side of the table, who were now staring at the thick folders in confusion. Then, I looked at my terrified, corrupt family sitting on the right side of the table, whose faces were rapidly draining of all color. The absolute contrast was a beautiful, cinematic masterpiece. "I won't be signing this," I said, my voice ringing clear, sharp, and absolute across the silent boardroom. I reached out and pushed Todd's fake confession document far away from me. "But you will be reading that." I pushed the thick-bound folders across the polished mahogany table. They slid over the smooth wood with a soft scratching sound and stopped directly in front of the three men who held the actual financial power over Thomas Logistics. Mr. Davis, the senior commercial loan officer, looked down at the heavy cover. Richard Sterling and Paul Vance. The two primary venture capital investors frowned in confusion. They had come to this meeting expecting me to sign a confession of negligence. They had come expecting to see a broken fired accountant fall on her sword to save her family. Instead, I had just handed them a roadmap to a massive federal crime. I sat back in my chair at the far end of the table and folded my hands. "Go ahead and open them, gentlemen," I said. My voice was perfectly calm and steady. "I think you will find the contents much more interesting than the fake confession my brother-in-law just tried to force me to sign." Mr. Davis reached out and flipped open the heavy cover of his folder. The two wealthy investors mirrored his actions. The boardroom was so quiet I could hear the crisp sound of the thick paper turning. I watched my father from across the table. For the first time in my entire life, the smug, arrogant mask on his face began to slip. His confident posture faltered. He glanced nervously at Todd. Todd was gripping his gold pen so tightly, his knuckles were completely white. Chloe looked back and forth between her husband and our father with wide, terrified eyes. She knew something was wrong, but she lacked the intelligence to understand exactly what was happening. The first page inside the folder was the executive summary of my independent forensic audit. I had spent 2 sleepless nights translating complex accounting data into plain, simple English that any investor could instantly understand. I laid out the exact timeline of the missing $1.2 million. I detailed the phantom equipment leases Todd had authorized. I showed exactly how the money had been systematically siphoned out of the operational reserves and funneled into offshore holding companies before being used to fund their lavish personal lifestyle. But the financial summary was just the beginning. I watched Mr. Davis turn to the second section of the binder. I saw his eyes widen behind his wire-rimmed glasses. He was looking at the certified copies of the preliminary loan documents that Todd had submitted to his bank in Chicago. He was looking at the guarantor signature page. Right below the forged signature, I had included a certified digital tracking report. When a document is electronically signed on a corporate network, it leaves a permanent digital footprint. It stamps the exact time date and the specific computer terminal where the action took place. The forensic report clearly proved that my signature was applied from the exact Internet Protocol address assigned to Todd inside his executive office. Furthermore, the timestamp proved the forgery occurred 3 days after my father had publicly fired me and completely severed my access to the building. It was absolute, undeniable mathematical proof that I could not have signed that document. I watched the blood completely drain from Todd's face. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a cliff and was waiting to hit the ground. A thick layer of cold sweat broke out across his forehead. He opened his mouth to speak, but absolutely no sound came out. "Turn to page 42, I instructed the silent room. The sound of pages flipping filled the tense air. Page 42 contained the final and most devastating piece of evidence. It was the certified legal transcript of the audio recording I had captured in my father's office. I had paid an independent legal transcription service to verify the audio and print every single word. Mr. Davis read the words on the page. His face turned a dangerous shade of dark red. Richard Sterling, the older and more aggressive venture capitalist, traced his finger along the printed lines. He was reading the exact conversation where Todd laughed about forcing me to take the fall. He was reading the exact moment my father agreed to let me go to federal prison for wire fraud simply because I had no husband and no family to protect me. The absolute silence in the boardroom shattered like glass. "What on earth is this?" Richard Sterling roared. His deep voice echoed off the glass windows. He slammed his open hand down on top of the folder with incredible force. The loud crack made Chloe jump in her expensive leather chair. Sterling stood up and pointed a shaking finger directly at my father. "You look me in the eye, Thomas, and you tell me this is a joke. You tell me you did not just try to leverage our entire logistics fleet for a fraudulent bank loan." My father scrambled to stand up. His chair scraped violently against the carpet. "Richard, please calm down," he stammered, holding his hands up in a desperate gesture of peace. "That document is completely fabricated. Sarah is a disgruntled, fired employee. She has been incredibly unstable since the anniversary gala. She manufactured these numbers out of pure spite to ruin her sister." Mr. Davis, the bank loan officer, did not yell. His anger was completely cold and clinically precise. He closed the folder and looked at Todd with absolute disgust. "You forged a certified public accountant signature to secure $1 million federal loan disbursement from my institution," he said. His voice was dangerously quiet. "Do you have any idea what the penalty for commercial bank fraud is in this country?" "It was not me," Todd shouted. The pressure was simply too much for him to handle. The arrogant chief financial officer facade crumbled entirely. He stood up, backing away from the mahogany table like it was on fire. He pointed a trembling finger straight at my father. "He made me do it. Thomas told me to secure the cash. He said we needed the liquidity to cover the third quarter deficit. He told me to use Sarah's credentials because she was already gone. I was just following orders from the chief executive officer." "You pathetic coward!" my father yelled, his face turning purple with rage. "Do not you dare put this on me. You are the one who signed her name. You are the one who blew the hole in the budget with your stupid phantom vendor contracts." The two men who were supposed to represent the brilliant new future of Thomas Logistics were now publicly screaming at each other. They were tearing each other apart like cornered animals right in front of the people who held their financial lives in their hands. Paul Vance, the younger investor, looked at me sitting calmly at the end of the table. "You recorded them planning this?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "I captured the audio 2 nights ago, right here in this building." I explained clearly. "My lawyer currently holds the original digital audio files. We have already authenticated the recording. They orchestrated this entire morning to force me into signing a legal confession for a crime they committed. They thought I would blindly fall on my sword out of family loyalty." "Family loyalty," Richard Sterling scoffed, pacing behind his chair. "This is a federal criminal conspiracy. You are both going to federal prison." Mr. Davis stood up and buttoned his suit jacket. His face was a mask of pure professional authority. "As the senior officer of the lending institution, I am obligated to inform you that your commercial credit line is frozen effective immediately." He looked directly at my father. "Not a single dollar will move in or out of your corporate accounts. The loan application is officially terminated, and all existing debts are now flagged for immediate review. I am required by federal law to forward this entire forensic file to our legal department and the Federal Bureau of Investigation." When Mr. Davis said the words Federal Bureau of Investigation, Chloe finally realized the magnitude of what was happening. Until this exact moment, she had been staring blankly at the fighting men, but the word prison and the freezing of the accounts finally penetrated her deep ignorance. She realized that the endless stream of money was gone. She realized her massive new estate, the designer clothes, the luxury vacations, and her title as the golden child were completely over. Chloe collapsed forward onto the polished table and started sobbing uncontrollably. It was a loud, ugly, hysterical sound. She buried her face in her arm, crying about her reputation and her beautiful house. "Dad, do something," she wailed between heavy sobs. "Do not let them take my house. You promised we were rich. You promised Sarah would fix it." I watched my sister cry, and I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no guilt, and no satisfaction. I just felt a profound, empty closure. For 10 years, I had sacrificed my own happiness to ensure she never had to experience a single moment of discomfort. I had paid the price for her perfect life. Now, the bill had finally come due, and she had to pay it herself. My father was sweating profusely. His breathing was heavy and ragged. He looked around the room, realizing that his entire legacy was turning to ash. He saw the pure disgust on the faces of the investors. He saw the bank officer preparing to walk out the door and call the authorities. He saw his perfect golden child sobbing on the table and his son-in-law cowering in the corner. He realized he was losing absolutely everything. But a narcissist never truly surrenders. They always believe they can talk their way out of a burning room. They always believe their own lies are stronger than reality. "Wait," my father pleaded, holding his hands out toward Richard Sterling and Paul Vance. "Please, gentlemen, just wait 1 minute. Do not walk out that door. We can fix this. We can still save the company." Save the company. Sterling laughed a harsh, bitter sound. "Your son-in-law committed bank fraud. Your balance sheets are completely fabricated. You are millions of dollars in debt, and the federal authorities are about to lock down this entire building. There is no company left to save Thomas. You destroyed it." "I still own the company," my father shouted, his voice cracking with sheer desperation. "I still own the controlling executive shares. I still have personal assets. I can make you whole. I promise you I will make every single investor whole." Mr. Davis stopped near the door and looked back. "How exactly do you plan to do that, Thomas? Your accounts are frozen. I will liquidate my personal estate." My father said, words rushing out of his mouth in a frantic blur. "I will sell the family mansion. I will sell the land. I will sell the entire heavy-duty freight fleet. I will sell the warehouse, the forklifts, everything. I will strip this logistics network down to the copper wiring if I have to. I will cover the $1.2 million shortfall out of my own pocket, and we can restructure the venture capital shares. Just do not call the authorities. Keep this quiet, and I will pay you back every single cent with heavy interest." He sounded so pathetic. The great Thomas, the man who had stood on a stage and called me an ungrateful burden, was now begging for his corporate life. He was perfectly willing to sell the very company I had spent 10 years keeping alive, just to save himself from wearing a prison uniform. He was willing to sacrifice the livelihood of every single truck driver and warehouse worker we employed just to cover up his own massive greed. Chloe looked up from the table with mascara running down her face. "Dad, you cannot sell the estate," she cried. "You transferred the estate to me. That is my house. You promised it was mine." "Shut up, Chloe," my father snapped his face, twisting with cruel panic. "You will do exactly what I tell you to do to keep us out of jail." He turned back to the investors, wiping the heavy sweat from his forehead with the sleeve of his expensive suit. "I have the legal authority to liquidate," he promised them. "The assets are fully mine to sell. I can authorize the transfer of the physical fleet tomorrow morning. We just need to sign a private settlement agreement today. I have the power to do this." Dad desperately told the investors he would liquidate his personal estate to cover the fraud. "I still own the company," he said, breathing heavily. "I will sell the trucks, the warehouse, everything." That is when my lawyer, Mr. Harrison, stepped into the room. The heavy double doors of the executive boardroom swung open with a sharp click, cutting through the chaotic sound of my father, frantic begging. Every single head around the polished mahogany table snapped toward the entrance. My father stood frozen, his hand still extended toward the venture capital investors, his mouth slightly open as the smooth, patronizing mask he had worn for decades completely dissolved into a look of pure confusion. Standing in the doorway was William Harrison. My corporate whistleblower attorney looked absolutely immaculate in his tailored charcoal suit and a crisp white shirt. He carried a heavy leather briefcase and wore an expression of complete professional calm. He did not look like a man entering a hostile boardroom. He looked like a seasoned federal judge walking into an empty courtroom to deliver a final sentence. My father adjusted his suit jacket, trying desperately to claw back some shred of his dynamic executive authority. "Who on earth are you?" my father demanded, his voice cracking slightly with an undercurrent of panic. "This is a private executive board meeting of Thomas Logistics. Security is supposed to keep the floor clear. You cannot just walk in here without an appointment." Mr. Harrison did not answer him immediately. He walked slowly down the length of the room, his leather shoes making a steady, rhythmic sound on the carpet. He stopped right beside my chair at the far end of the table, set his heavy briefcase down, and popped the brass locks with a loud metallic snap. He pulled a thick stack of legal documents printed on heavy watermarked paper from the interior pocket and slid them across the polished wood. The papers glided over the mahogany and stopped right on top of the fake confession document Todd had tried to force me to sign. "My name is William Harrison," my lawyer said, his deep voice carrying effortlessly across the silent room. "I am the senior legal counsel representing your daughter, Sarah. And I am not here to negotiate with you, Thomas. I am here to serve you with formal federal notice." My father stared down at the documents, his eyes scanning the official government headers printed across the top page. "What is the meaning of this?" he whispered, his face rapidly turning a mottled shade of gray. "I just told our investors that I am liquidating my personal estate to cover the shortfall. I am selling the family mansion. I am transferring the liquid cash reserves. I am selling the trucks and the warehouse to make this bank loan right today." I stood up slowly from my leather chair, smoothing the front biceps of my charcoal blazer. I looked across the table at the family who had spent 10 years using me as their invisible workhorse, the family who had happily celebrated my public execution at the anniversary gala just 2 months ago. "You cannot liquidate a single asset, Dad," I said. My voice was perfectly flat, completely devoid of any fear or hesitation. "You cannot sell the family home, you cannot transfer the cash reserves, and you cannot touch a single truck in the freight yard. You do not own them anymore." My father gripped the edge of the mahogany table so hard, his knuckles turned white. "What are you talking about, Sarah?" he hissed, trying to project strength while his entire body trembled. "Of course I own them. I am the patriarch of this family. I am the founder of this company." "No, you are not," I replied calmly. 7 days ago, right after Chloe showed up at my apartment soaking wet and crying about a cash flow issue, I did not just sit on my couch and feel sad. I did not let my sisterly guilt blind me. I knew Chloe lacked the basic financial literacy to understand corporate debt, which meant she was repeating words she had been coached to say. My auditor's intuition told me to look at the numbers. I pulled out my personal encrypted backup drive and conducted a full forensic audit of our financial database. That was when I discovered that Todd had forged my name and my certified public accountant credentials to secure a fraudulent $1.2 million commercial real estate loan from Mr. Davis's bank in Chicago. Todd let out a strange, choked sound from his seat, his eyes darting wildly toward the exit. And I knew that digital proof on a hard drive was not enough to stop you. I continued looking directly at my father. I knew that if I confronted you privately, you would use your expensive lawyers to cover up the paper trail and make me the disgruntled scapegoat. So Mr. Harrison and I spent the last week doing something much more permanent. We compiled every single fraudulent invoice, every phantom equipment lease, and the IP address tracking logs that proved Todd executed the forgery from his terminal inside this building. And then we submitted a formal comprehensive whistleblower report directly to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service and the Securities and Exchange Commission. The announcement hit the room like a physical shockwave. Richard Sterling, the senior venture capitalist, let out a loud, sharp breath. Paul Grant, the younger investor, dropped his phone onto the table, his eyes wide with sudden realization. When you commit multi-million-dollar bank fraud using forged professional credentials to alter federal tax liabilities, the government does not wait for a formal trial date. I explained, letting the cold reality settle over the boardroom. They move instantly to protect the state's financial interests. Because of the sheer magnitude of the criminal fraud we documented, federal judges approved our emergency petitions at 8 o'clock this morning. The Internal Revenue Service has officially placed jeopardy assessments and hard federal liens on every single asset connected to the Thomas family name and Thomas Logistics. I turned my gaze toward my younger sister. Chloe was sitting perfectly frozen in her leather chair, her fingers digging into the fabric of her expensive designer sweater. Her blue eyes were wide with a primal, terrifying realization. That means the $2 million estate my father proudly handed you at the gala is completely frozen, Chloe, I said. My voice held absolutely no anger, just a clinical, devastating precision. The liquid cash reserves in your personal accounts are locked. You cannot withdraw a single dollar to buy a cup of coffee, let alone hire a high-end criminal defense attorney to keep your husband out of prison. The federal government views every single asset you possess as the direct proceeds of an active criminal enterprise. They are going to seize the house. They are going to seize the luxury cars. You are walking out of this building today with absolutely nothing but the clothes you are wearing right now. Chloe opened her mouth, but instead of words, a thin, high-pitched whine escaped her throat. She looked at Todd, desperate for him to say something to perform another miracle to save her perfect wealthy lifestyle. But Todd was no longer sitting at the table. He had slid completely out of his chair and was currently huddled on the floor against the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, his knees pulled tightly to his chest while he hyperventilated. The arrogant CO president, who had laughed on a recorded phone call about sending me to a concrete cell, was now weeping silently into his hands. My father slammed both of his fists down onto the mahogany table with an explosion of sudden violent rage. "You ungrateful, vindictive monster!" he screamed, his face turning a dark, dangerous shade of purple. He pointed a shaking finger at my face, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. "You planned this whole thing. You deliberately orchestrated this emergency board meeting just to humiliate me in front of my investors. You came into my building pretending to be a noble martyr just to destroy your own family name." "I did not destroy this family, Dad," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "You destroyed this family the night you stood on a stage and called me an ungrateful burden to justify firing me. You destroyed it when you decided my freedom was an acceptable sacrifice to cover up Todd's crimes because you believed my life had no value outside of serving your greed. I did not build the trap. You built it yourself out of your own boundless arrogance. I just handed the forensic evidence to the federal government and let them pull the lever." My father looked wildly around the room, realizing that his grand illusion of the perfect, honorable American patriarch was permanently shattered. He saw the cold, clinical disgust in the eyes of the bank officer, Mr. Davis. He saw the furious, calculating expressions on the faces of Richard Sterling and Paul Grant. He was losing his wealth, his status, and his power, all in the span of a single morning. But a narcissist never truly surrenders control. They will claw at the walls until their fingers bleed before they admit they have lost. "Fine." My father spat a frantic, desperate energy taking over his entire body. "Let the federal authorities audit the bank accounts. Let them freeze my personal estate. I do not care. I am still the chief executive officer of Thomas Logistics. I still own 100% of the executive voting shares in this network. You cannot touch my position." He turned to face the two venture capital investors, his voice dropping into a harsh, authoritative command. "You two only own minority stakes in this logistics company," he yelled, glaring at Sterling and Grant. "I hold the absolute controlling interest. I am convening an emergency executive session right now. I vote to dissolve this entire board of directors effective immediately. I vote to terminate your oversight privileges and remove your access to our operational facilities. I'm locking down this building and firing every single person who stands against the Thomas name. Get out of my boardroom. All of you get out." Richard Sterling narrowed his sharp eyes, a look of profound contempt crossing his weathered face. "You cannot unilaterally dissolve a corporate board when you are facing federal criminal indictments, Thomas," he said coldly. "You are completely out of your mind." I have the controlling shares, my father roared, his voice cracking with the sheer volume of his panic. I can do whatever I want. This is my company. I built it from the ground up with my own hands. No, Dad, I said quietly. My voice cut through his screaming like a razor-sharp blade. You did not build it, and you certainly do not own it anymore. I reached down into my leather briefcase one final time. I pulled out a single thin manila folder. It looked entirely unremarkable compared to the massive binders of forensic auditing data I had presented earlier. But this single folder contained the definitive checkmate. I placed it gently on the polished mahogany table and slid it toward the investors. When I was conducting the forensic review of our digital servers last week, I did not just look at the current quarterly ledgers, I explained to the quiet room. I dug into the deepest, oldest historical archives of Thomas Logistics. I went all the way back to the very first foundational agreements drafted 30 years ago. I found the original corporate trust. My father stopped breathing. A new, deeper kind of terror washed over his sweating face as he recognized the faded cream-colored document resting on the table. He knew exactly what was printed on those pages. You always loved telling our clients that you started this multi-million-dollar empire with a single leased truck and a dream, I said, looking straight into his eyes. But that was a carefully constructed lie designed to feed your ego. You did not start this company, Dad. Mom did. The silence in the boardroom became absolute. My mother had passed away when I was very young, leaving me behind with a father who only valued what I could provide for his business. But as I meticulously reviewed the legal charters last week, I discovered the undeniable truth. My mother had been the primary financial backer of Thomas Logistics. She had provided the entire seed money from her independent inheritance. She had established the original corporate trust, and because she knew her husband was a reckless, arrogant man who would eventually let his greed override his sanity, she had embedded a very specific, very powerful legal protection mechanism into the foundation of the company bylaws. I opened the folder and read the highlighted text aloud, so every single person in the room could hear the words my mother had written 3 decades ago. In the event that the primary managing shareholder utilizes corporate assets to commit willful financial fraud, embezzlement, or any felony action that actively endangers the operational solvency of the entity, their executive voting shares shall be immediately and permanently rendered null and void. I closed the folder and looked at my father. Mom knew exactly who you were. Dad, I whispered. She knew that if you were left unchecked, you would eventually destroy everything to protect your own image. So she built a trapdoor into the very architecture of the corporate shares. Richard Sterling reached across the table and grabbed the original trust document. He put on his reading glasses and scanned the legal text, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. Paul Grant leaned over his shoulder, reading the bad actor clause with absolute satisfaction. They were venture capitalists who measured human worth strictly in profit margins and risk mitigation, and they realized they finally had the absolute legal leverage to eliminate my father permanently. By executing a fraudulent $1.2 million commercial loan against our heavy-duty freight fleet, you have actively committed a federal felony that endangers the survival of this entire company, I stated clearly. Under the strict terms of my late mother's original corporate trust, your voting shares are instantly and completely voided. You do not hold the controlling interest anymore, Thomas. In fact, as of this exact second, you hold absolutely zero voting power in Thomas Logistics. Richard Sterling took off his reading glasses and folded them neatly, setting them down on top of the document. He looked across the table at my father with a look of profound professional disdain. Well, Thomas, he said, his deep voice booming with absolute authority. It appears the minority shareholders are now the only individuals in this room with active voting rights. My father lunged forward, his hands slamming onto the table as he tried to look commanding one last time. You cannot do this to me, Richard. We have been business partners for a decade. You cannot just steal my company away from me. You stole it from yourself, Thomas Sterling replied coldly. And I refuse to let my multi-million-dollar venture capital investment sink to the bottom of the ocean. because you and your pathetic son-in-law decided to play games with federal bank fraud. Sterling turned to face Paul Grant, completely ignoring my father's desperate face. As the newly recognized majority voting bloc of Thomas Logistics, I hereby propose an immediate formal motion to legally force this company into involuntary corporate receivership, Sterling declared. We will bring in an independent restructuring firm to manage the assets and protect our interests during the federal investigation. Furthermore, I move to permanently terminate Thomas and Todd from all executive duties and strip them of their corporate titles effective this exact second. I second the motion, Paul Grant said, without a single moment of hesitation. The motion carries 2-0. Sterling announced, picking up his pen and making a sharp notation on his legal pad. You are officially unemployed, Thomas. I suggest you start packing your desk before the federal authorities arrive to lock down the executive floor. My father collapsed backward into his heavy leather executive chair, his shoulders slumping as the last shred of his manufactured authority evaporated into thin air. He looked completely hollowed out, a broken old man sitting in the absolute ruins of his own boundless greed. Suddenly, a loud, piercing sound drifted up from the busy city streets below, cutting through the heavy silence of the room. It was faint at first, but it grew rapidly louder, sharper, and more urgent with every passing second. It was the distinct, wailing echo of multiple police sirens approaching the building. Chloe jumped out of her chair, running frantically toward the floor-to-ceiling glass windows to look down at the sprawling freight yard. "Oh my God!" she shrieked, her voice thick with a primal, terrifying panic. There are police cruisers pulling into the visitor parking lot. They are blocking the main security gates. They are coming inside the lobby. Everyone in the boardroom turned to look at Mr. Davis, the senior commercial loan officer from the Chicago bank. Mr. Davis calmly adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, stood up, and neatly closed his thick file of underwriting documents. When Miss Sarah presented me with absolute, undeniable proof of aggravated corporate identity theft and commercial bank fraud. 20 minutes ago, I utilized my cellular device under the table. Mr. Davis explained, his tone perfectly polite and professional. I alerted the local authorities to a felony in progress involving forged certified public accountant credentials. I believe they are here to escort Todd to the precinct for formal processing. Todd let out a loud, miserable wail from his position on the floor, curling into a tight ball as he wept openly about going to federal prison. Chloe backed away from the window, her hands shaking as she stumbled over her own feet, completely paralyzed by the reality of losing everything she had ever stolen from me. The boardroom devolved into total chaos. The venture capital investors were quickly packing their briefcases, preparing to meet the restructuring lawyers in the lobby. Mr. Davis was dialing his legal department to coordinate with the district attorney. My father just sat rigid in his leather chair, staring blankly at the polished mahogany table, completely unable to comprehend that his entire empire was permanently gone. My work here was completely finished. I reached down and closed the brass locks on my leather briefcase, the sharp click sounding incredibly satisfying in the noisy room. I stood up slowly from the table, smoothed the lapels of my charcoal blazer, and looked down at my father one final time. He did not look up at me. He just kept staring at the wood, his chest rising and falling with shallow, defeated breaths. You stood in front of 200 people at the gala and told the world I was just a rigid, jealous bean counter who lacked vision, Dad. I said, my voice calm, cold, and absolute. You believed my life had no value because I chose to focus on the facts instead of your empty, corporate illusions. But you forgot the most basic rule of my profession. A good accountant sees absolutely everything. I turned my back on my father, my sobbing sister, and the cowering criminal on the floor. I walked down the center of the massive executive boardroom with purposeful, steady steps. I pushed through the heavy oak doors and stepped out into the quiet corporate hallway, leaving them behind to choke on the ruins of their own greed. 6 months have passed since that freezing morning in the executive boardroom. In the world of corporate finance and federal investigations, the wheels of justice turn slowly, but they grind forward with absolute, devastating precision. I did not have to lift another finger against my family after I walked out of that building. The federal government stepped in and handled the rest. Todd was the very first to fall completely. You cannot forge a certified public accountant credential to secure a massive commercial real estate loan and expect a simple slap on the wrist. The Federal Bureau of Investigation formally indicted him on multiple federal counts of wire fraud, bank fraud, and aggravated identity theft. He frantically tried to hire an expensive, high-profile defense attorney using company funds, but Mr. Davis from the Chicago bank had permanently frozen every single corporate account. Todd was forced to rely on an overworked public defender. He is currently sitting in a county holding facility awaiting his formal federal sentencing hearing. The aggressive prosecutors are pushing hard for 5 to 7 years in a federal penitentiary. The arrogant, flashy executive who used to lecture me about corporate synergy and aggressive market disruption is now wearing a bright orange jumpsuit, trading his fake luxury watch for a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. When the federal indictments finally came down, my younger sister Chloe did exactly what you would expect a spoiled golden child to do when her perfect life catches on fire. She turned entirely on the man she married. She filed for an emergency divorce, claiming she had absolutely no idea what Todd was doing with the company finances. She truly thought throwing her husband to the wolves would protect her inherited wealth and keep her out of prison. She was completely wrong. The Internal Revenue Service does not care about your marital status or your tears when you are sitting on a mountain of fraudulent cash. Because my father had legally transferred the $2 million family estate and all the liquid corporate cash reserves into her name. Right before the federal liens were placed, the government viewed her entire luxurious lifestyle as the direct proceeds of a criminal enterprise. Federal agents arrived at her beautiful home early on a Tuesday morning. They seized her custom designer furniture. They seized the expensive luxury vehicles from the driveway, and they seized the house itself to pay back the massive $1.2 million financial shortfall. Chloe walked out of that mansion with nothing but a single cheap suitcase of clothes. My father fought the longest, but his fall was the most profound and humiliating. He spent 3 grueling months locked in a bitter legal war, trying to fight the venture capital investors and the federal auditors. He truly believed he could charm, manipulate, or scream his way out of the disaster just like he always did. But Richard Sterling and Paul Vance legally forced Thomas Logistics into involuntary receivership, stripping my father of his chief executive officer title and liquidating the entire heavy-duty freight fleet to salvage their initial investments. Without the company cash flow to protect him, my father was personally held liable for the remaining operational debts. He was forced to declare Chapter 7 personal bankruptcy. The commercial bank quickly foreclosed on his massive, sprawling mansion. The elite country club, where he had spent 10 years buying expensive dinners to impress local politicians and wealthy bankers, formally revoked his membership. He was completely exiled from the wealthy social circles he had sacrificed his own daughter to impress. Today, the great Thomas, the powerful patriarch who looked me in the eye, told me I lacked vision and forced me out into the cold, is living in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a rundown neighborhood on the outskirts of Columbus. He shares the tiny space with Chloe. Because they have absolutely no savings and terrible credit history, they were both forced to find entry-level employment just to keep the lights on and pay their basic rent. My father works as a greeter at a local hardware store, wearing a cheap blue vest and directing customers to the plumbing aisle for minimum wage. Chloe, the former chief executive officer of a logistics empire, is currently working the cash register at a discount clothing retail store. She stands on her feet for 8 hours a day, scanning clearance tags and dealing with rude customers. I do not drive past their apartment. I do not check their social media. But knowing they are finally experiencing the brutal reality of actual hard work, the kind of exhausting, thankless labor they forced me to endure for a decade, brings me a profound sense of quiet closure. As for me, my life looks absolutely nothing like the miserable, invisible existence they planned for me. When I presented that meticulous forensic audit in the boardroom, the venture capital investors did not just use it to destroy my father. They recognized the brilliance, the dedication, and the relentless accuracy of my work. 2 weeks after the logistics company went into receivership, Richard Sterling called my private cell phone. He told me that in his 30 years of corporate acquisitions, he had never seen an accountant dismantle a fraudulent enterprise with such terrifying precision. He and Paul Vance offered me massive financial backing to start my own independent financial consulting firm. I accepted their generous offer immediately. I opened my own modern office in downtown Columbus with beautiful floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. I specialize in forensic auditing, corporate risk mitigation, and complex tax compliance for high net worth clients. I now make triple the salary my father ever paid me. I drive a reliable car, I own a beautiful sunlit apartment, and my professional reputation is absolutely flawless. I wake up every single morning before the sun rises, not because I am terrified of unpaid vendors calling my phone, but because I am genuinely excited to go to work. The heavy, suffocating weight of seeking validation from a family that only viewed me as an exploitable tool is completely gone. I no longer shrink myself to make them comfortable. I no longer sacrifice my own peace to clean up their toxic messes. I am finally entirely free. If you look at my life from the outside today, you see a successful financial consultant with a thriving business and a peaceful home. But getting here required surviving a betrayal that fundamentally changed how I view the entire world. I want to take a moment to talk about what this experience actually taught me. When you grow up as the responsible one in a family, you are conditioned to believe a very dangerous lie. You are taught that your value is entirely tied to your usefulness. Society tells us that family loyalty is absolute. We hear phrases like, blood is thicker than water, so often that they become etched into our subconscious. We are conditioned to believe that if we just work hard enough, the people we love will eventually realize our worth and love us back the way we deserve. But here's the absolute, unvarnished truth that took me 31 years and a massive federal fraud case to finally understand. Sacrifice without respect is just exploitation. There is no nobility in allowing yourself to be used as a human shield by people who would never step in front of a bullet for you. I spent a decade believing I was the invisible backbone of the Thomas family empire. I thought my relentless 80-hour work weeks and my canceled personal life were acts of profound love. I thought I was protecting them, but they did not view my sacrifices as acts of love. They viewed them as an open invitation to exploit my loyalty. They looked at my dedication and saw a naive, obedient tool they could use to cover up their catastrophic mistakes. We are taught that family loyalty is absolute, but loyalty should not be a one-way street leading to a prison cell. True family loyalty requires mutual respect, protection, and honesty. It does not involve forging your daughter's professional credentials to steal over $1 million. It does not involve framing your own sister for tax evasion just to maintain a luxurious lifestyle you never earned. When my father and Chloe sat in that dark office and agreed that my freedom was an acceptable price to pay for their greed, they did me a massive favor. They shattered the illusion completely. When people show you they view you as a tool rather than a person, believe them. You cannot love someone into treating you with basic human decency. You cannot work hard enough to make an arrogant person care about your well-being. The hardest part of walking away from a toxic family dynamic is overcoming the overwhelming guilt. We are conditioned to feel selfish the moment we stop serving others. But let me be perfectly clear. Boundaries are not selfish. They are self-preservation. Saying no to exploitation is the healthiest thing you can ever do for your own mind and your future. Drawing a hard line and refusing to clean up another person's mess does not make you a bad daughter. It makes you a person who finally respects herself. My family tried to weaponize my sense of duty against me. They tried to use my deeply ingrained habit of fixing their problems to destroy my entire life. The only reason I'm sitting here today as a free, successful woman instead of wearing a prison uniform is because I finally chose to protect myself. And never, ever let them have the keys to your financial future. It does not matter if they are your father, your sister, your husband, or your oldest friend. Financial independence is the ultimate armor against manipulation. If I had not maintained my own separate bank accounts, if I had not kept meticulous personal backups of my professional work, if I had blindly trusted my father to handle the legal architecture of my career, I would have been completely destroyed. You must understand your own finances. You must protect your professional reputation with absolute vigilance. Your ability to walk away from a toxic situation depends entirely on your ability to support yourself. When you hold the keys to your own survival, nobody can ever force you to stay in a burning building. The peace I feel today is worth every single tear I shed during that terrifying month. Waking up every morning without the crushing weight of their expectations is the greatest success of my life. I am no longer the family punching bag. I am no longer the invisible workhorse. I am the architect of my own destiny, and that is a title nobody can ever take away from me. If you are watching this and you have ever been the workhorse for a family that did not appreciate you, I want you to comment the word enough below, so I know I am not alone. I know how exhausting it is to carry the weight of other people's incompetence. I know how lonely it feels to realize that the people you would do anything for would not do the same for you. What would you have done if your family tried to frame you for their crimes? Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there? I love connecting with you all. It helps me to hear your stories and to know we are all healing together. Please hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you do not miss my next story. It really helps this channel grow and reach other people who might desperately need to hear this message today. I have so many more experiences to share with you about standing up for yourself and taking your power back. Until next time, stay strong, know your worth, and protect your peace. You deserve to live a beautiful life on your own terms.